meeting. On the agenda today, we have items of interest from commissioners, followed by the director's report, then consideration of the consent agenda. That will be followed by the solid waste and recycling rates hearing and recommendation. And then that will be followed by the airport futures progress report briefing. And that will be followed by the transportation system development charge update briefing. With that, are there any items of interest today, Chris?
So it's been a while since I gave you a street safety update. I was tracking the numbers pretty closely last year. I just wanted to get you guys up to date looking after the first quarter. These numbers are as of May 4th. And last year, on May 4th, we had 20 fatalities on the streets in Portland. I'm happy to say this year is only 9, which is tracking at about the 2015 level. So that's good news in a perverse way. Sadly, there was one fatality since I got these numbers, so the actual count now is 10. And I'll just note that the first public draft of the state transportation funding package is out, which, following the usual pattern, contains billions for highways and millions for transit and bikes and pedestrians. So all the more reason to keep fighting at a local level for the right priorities. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. Teresa, and I think my light was on, so maybe that's why you weren't getting it. So let's try this, Teresa.
Oh, my light's been on the whole time.
We have a dead mic over here.
So I just wanted to give a little update on the mixed-use affordable commercial bonus project that we're working on. And that has Andre and Chris and myself on it. We've had our second meeting. Well, the first one was just kind of a briefing with our staff. And then we had a meeting with the joint group this morning. So working through it, it's interesting. There is some question as to whether just reducing rent is enough to help small businesses succeed. And if that's, just not enough. There's some other things to play into that. And so now they're going to do some economic analysis and work on some valuations for the FAR bonus, what it's worth, and also where the uptake might be. And also how to deal with the administration, because if you make a really complicated program for a very small number of people, it's not really very efficient. So we do have to kind of look at the whole picture. So a couple more sessions, and then I think we'll have a recommendation.
I think it's also possible that we want to bring it back to this group to get more input on who exactly the incentives should be targeted for.
Yeah, on a positive note, we did entertain 22 international experts working on nature in the city related issues around the world from multiple cities. The good news is that it went really well. The interesting thing was their observation after having attended a half-day summit up at the Oregon Zoo, the Intertwined Alliance Summit and the Nature of Cities Summit, was they were blown away by the level of commitment and expertise by local citizens. We arranged it so they did 10-minute presentations on what's going on in Kampala, in Paris, in Bogota, et cetera, et cetera. And then we broke out into roundtables at which they sat and local people interacted. Teresa was there. And they were really blown away by the dynamic in Portland with regard to interaction of citizens and elected officials and agency folks. That was really cool. The downside, I mentioned this to City Council on I think it was last Thursday, that I had already arranged for an interview on KBOO, the Locus Focus program, a woman from the Netherlands who, it turned out 4 days before she was to fly here, was informed that because she made a presentation in Iran last year, she could not get a visa. And there was another individual who was not allowed into the U.S. So the upshot is, I've been pushing for the 2018 conference to be in Portland. The universal opinion of all the internationals was we are not coming back to the United States of America. Fortunately, we have Vancouver, BC that we can be pushing, so perhaps it could be in Cascadia. At any rate, it was a pretty cool event. and glad that Teresa and Chris was kind enough to help out on one of the 3 field trips we did that week.
Any other items of interest? Jeff? And then Eli.
I guess Chris and I are dead, so we'll speak loud over here. So I am, and I've been somewhat negligent, I'm your representative to DRAC, the Development Review Advisory Committee, which is a PBS staff, but a lot of the bureaus show up. It's got quite a cross-section of developers, neighborhood people on it. They kind of get more into the technical side of development. So what I forwarded to you yesterday, and I don't know if somebody had a chance to read it, is a letter. And actually what it turns out, what I sent you yesterday is a almost final draft. So the final draft is being wordsmithed, but what you saw yesterday captures the essence of what draft has been thinking about, which is not inconsistent with some of the issues we've discussed. The key recommendation in that letter, as I pointed out, is they've been getting these very quick presentations, briefings from various bureaus about increase in fees, particularly increases in SDCs. DRAC has no authority. They're not even really being asked for a recommendation. It's sort of a perfunctory, oh, by the way, we're increasing our fees, and here you go. There's been some discussion. I don't mean to shortchange it, but the concern of DRAC is the sort of inconsistency between the mayor's push for trying to watch the cost of housing, looking at fees, and anything that's contributing to the cost of housing on one hand, and on the other hand, SDCs, which are the most expensive portion of the development fee, keep going up. And each bureau has their own system development charge, and each bureau has a rational basis for saying, here's why we need to increase our fees. The concern of DRAC is, but across the board, if everybody goes up a little bit or a little bit more, you have the cumulative impact. And so they are asking the city council to not have any SDC increases kick in July 1, which is when the new budget will take effect. And instead, freeze them until at least January 1 and create some form of a holistic review. So that city council, and whether it goes to DRAC or comes to us or somebody, there's some effort to say, okay, who's asking for how much of an increase? What's the total impact? And try to view the SDCs, the individual SDCs, not in a silo, but holistically, as Teresa commented to me, I thought was a good one. One party pays all the SDCs. There may be 5 or 6 bureaus collecting it, but it's the developer submitting an application who pays them all. So that's the essence of the letter from DRAC, and I was asked to and agreed to sort of suggest that we do either our own letter or some kind of an echoing of that concern and share their recommendation to council to freeze the SDCs at least until January 1 and have some kind of a more holistic review. So that's what I'm proposing. Now, Joe suggested we do have a presentation later today from PBOT on their SDC. I think the presentation is a little bit more focused on the road, the list of projects, not so much the fee. But we could either discuss this now, or it seems more appropriate to wait until we have PBOT up here and do it in that context.
I guess what I'd like to suggest is that we, let's see how the meeting goes and put it at the end of the agenda. For what it's worth, this is an item that I also raised outside of not realizing DRAC was looking into it, as just, it seems like somebody needs to kind of be helping to corral that discussion. So, and I think it might be a little bit longer discussion so that we can stay on agenda. Let's try to maybe put that to the end if you're okay with that. Eli had his hand up next, and then I see Mike.
This is really just a
also
question
did.
back for Chris, I think, since you've been tracking fatalities so closely. Does it exist a map that shows fatalities overlaid with transportation funding plans, like a heat map, and it can be separated off ODOT versus Portland? You know?
Yeah, Portland's, a microphone, yay. Portland's Vision Zero website has a map of all the fatalities. I don't know that it coordinates with the funding priorities, although, PBOT has identified high crash corridors and has directed funding to them, so the connection exists. I just don't know that it's mapped quite the way you're talking about, but the fatalities and serious injuries are definitely mapped.
And then, Andre.
Well, since we're going to discuss this later, I'll simply say that I have a lot of concern about our signing a letter without knowing more about the potential impacts. Every time we go for SDC increase for parks, you know, it's fought tooth and nail. And the fact of the matter is Parks does not recover enough to actually provide the parks that this city needs as it grows. So we're going to need to have a very deep understanding of what the, you know, the up and down sides are before I'd sign on to any letter like that.
Andre?
I would just agree with what Catherine said. I think this body has raised the concern of not only looking at SDCs, but all of the charges that come to housing and trying to quantify them. I think we've put that in a letter before to council. We're going to have another opportunity through the comp plan. What I'm trying to figure out is not only this letter, but I think there's other concerns that other groups may have. What's going to be different? Asking for a moratorium, we've been down that road before as a commission, and that's fraught with a whole bunch of other issues. So I would be a little concerned that we have a comp plan 2035 that we're going to send that we can address maybe that broader concern that we've talked about before in terms of fees and the accumulation of fees total from the city on housing and looking at that from that standpoint. And I do think it's a longer conversation than today.
So again, I appreciate everyone's comments on that. If we could, again, hold them toward the end so that we can kind of keep moving towards the hearing. Are there any other items of interest not related to SDC fees? No? Hearing none. Joe, Director's Report?
Quick item, I'd like to introduce Catherine Charlo. Just we're for a period of time, we're going to be meeting over here in the CH2M building. And Catherine is with CH and offer a welcome.
Great, thanks. Susan just asked me to come and say a couple words of welcome on behalf of CH2M. We're the main tenant in this building, and I was really happy to do that. I served on the Planning Commission from 2006 to 2009, and I see some of my old friends here. And I will say that when I left the Planning Commission, I went to the mayor's office a couple of administrations ago now, and it was actually probably the hardest choice for me to make about taking that job was leaving the Planning Commission, which sounds crazy, but you guys know because you do it, you're in the absolute heart of what happens in the city. So thank you for that. I know it's also a ton of work, and thank you for putting in the work, and we are so happy to be able to welcome you to our charming building here. At least it's a nice view, similar to the view you have over there. So thanks. Yeah, really nice to have you here.
Thank you very much for hosting us. We greatly appreciate it.
Of course, we're glad it worked out. Great.
Thank you.
Enjoy it.
That's all? Okay. So next item is the consideration of the minutes from April 25th. It says 2016, but I think that was 2017.
Move the consent agenda?
All in favor? Opposed? That passes. Okay, and our hearing for today is the solid waste and recycling rates. If Michael and Bruce and Ariane, is it Ariane or Ariana?
Ariane.
Okay, thank you. Can come on up and get it rolling. That'd be great.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, Chair Schultz. We're here today to talk about residential solid waste rates. I'm Bruce Walker, the Solid Waste and Recycling Program Manager for the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability. With me is Ariane Sperry, a program coordinator who's done much of the work to lead us through the rate review in a very time-compressed manner that we undertake on an annual basis. She'll go through more of the details today, but to just cast a quick recap of what we've touched on before, our bureau oversees the residential garbage, recycling, and composting services that are provided by private haulers to the single family through fourplex homes, residential dwellings in the city of Portland. The service is provided by 14 private companies in a franchise system. The city sets the service standards, and we establish rates on an annual rate review process that we're bringing to you today. The commercial sector, including multifamily housing, 5 units and larger, and all other businesses, is not franchised. The city sets still extensive service standards, issues permits to haulers, private haulers, to provide those services to businesses in multifamily. And we collect a commercial tonnage fee from the haulers of the garbage that's disposed. So that helps fund BPS programs in the city. We are not proposing any changes to the commercial tonnage fee this year. So that's set aside. We haven't brought anything forward. But for residential rates, we conduct an annual rate review as we review haulers' reports that are submitted to us, the detailed cost reports. They submit everything throughout the year, a whole range of reports, the tons they collect of garbage, recycling, composting, even the amount of biodiesel that's being used by each of the companies. That's a requirement that they have. But the detailed cost reports are reviewed. They're received in our office. They're reviewed by an independent certified public accountant that is on contract to our office. The information collected there is put together in a rate model that we've got a contract with an economist who does work to establish this. It's a process that occurs annually. There's benefit to that so that we don't get too far out of line with what the actual costs of our system are. Today, Ariane's going to go through the details and recap. It's a brief presentation. You've received the information in your packet. Afterwards, I believe there's testimony to be provided. We'll come back, answer any questions either in the midst of your presentation or at the end. Finally, we're going to be seeking a recommendation from your commission to endorse the rates that we are going to be proposing to council that will be scheduled next week. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ariane Sperry to walk through more of the details.
All right, thanks, Bruce. Just to recap that these are some of the key rate factors that we look at in our annual review process. Labor and fuel costs and inflation on those. The disposal costs for garbage as well as yard debris and food scraps. And the revenue for recyclable material sales. So this is, oh, sorry, it's very slippery. These are the rate components for the 35-gallon roll cart, which is our most popular service level, and 44% of our customers have this service level. And so this slide shows how the rate components changed over the from last year to this year. So you can see that the garbage costs are down, and that reflects the fact that Metro, our regional government, has lowered the tip fee at our regional transfer stations by about 1%. And then similarly, the Metro has increased the disposal for, or not disposal, but the tipping fee for yard debris and food scraps. So that's reflected in, you can see that the composting cost component is increasing. But even still, the tip fee for yard debris and food scraps is $30 a ton less than garbage. And we collect substantially more of that material than garbage, and we collect it twice as often. So the compost program has a lot of financial as well as environmental benefits for our program. It is a screaming deal, even though it's going up a little. But overall, as a whole, the rate is proposed to increase 10 cents. And that little asterisk is there to remind me to talk to you guys about the West Side terrain area, because the cost to provide the collection service isn't the same throughout the city. On Portland's west side, there's lower street connectivity, larger lots, narrow and windy roads, and those are more expensive to service. And so we include a terrain fee because we need to provide all of the haulers the same opportunity to earn the 9.5% operating margin that's required as part of our franchise agreement. And we've seen in our review that the productivity differential between the east side and the west side terrain area has grown as haulers have increased the efficiency gains on the east side as opposed to the west side. So the terrain fee is proposed to increase by 20 cents this year. Wow, I guess I just need to click. No. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry about that. As you know, our rate process adds projected inflation to the actual costs that the haulers incur over the previous year, as opposed to the current rate. And so this graph shows the benefit of that system. So if you look back 5 years ago, and if we had added inflation to the actual rates, our rate by now would be several dollars higher. So the beauty of the system and the annual rate review is that the haulers have an incentive to be more efficient, and we capture those efficiencies, and then the benefits accrue to the customers. So this is the first rate increase that we've seen in 5 years, but you can see the proposed rate is still lower than it was 5 years ago. Okay. Sorry. Okay. So when we looked at the rates for the other primary service levels, other than the 35-gallon roll cart, some were going up a little more than 10 cents, and some were going up a little less than 10 cents. But they were all really close, so we decided let's just make it simple and say all the primary rates will increase by 10 cents. And we've talked to you before about the incentives that we include in the rates to encourage people to generate less garbage and compost and recycle as much as possible. We apply a small discount to the smaller garbage carts and add a premium to the larger garbage carts. But this year, the incentive discounts and premiums are proposed to stay virtually the same as they were last year. And so next steps. Oh, look. We're seeking a recommendation from you today, as Bruce mentioned, as we look toward our May 18 utility rate hearing at City Council. And if you do vote to recommend the rates, we'll work with you to send a letter to City Council. And then once City Council adopts the rates, they'll take effect on July 1. Any questions?
Does not appear so.
You're going to come back.
You're so clear.
Pardon?
You're going to be up here later. Yes.
If you have questions, we can.
Yeah. No, Bruce knows what I'm going to ask. I know Metro Parks and Nature Program derives some substantial funding from tippage fees, and they're pretty minuscule amount of money, but it adds up, obviously. The premise of that is that illegal dumping and a number of other things have negative impacts out there on the environment in general, but their sites. And I last time asked whether there was had ever been any conversation to have a similar portion of the fee be applied to Portland parks that get trashed all the time by folks illegal dumping and so forth. I don't know if you remember that question or not. I'm not suggesting that be part of the conversation today, but I'm just putting it out there again And I think your response last time was not this time around, but we'll be willing to take a look at that.
One of the elements that we've worked on is you've referred to Metro's efforts in their park areas, but they also provide a service, the Regional Illegal Dumping Team, the RID program, in terms of addressing the illegal dumping. They have a team that not only does some cleanup, but also tries to seek out some of the perpetrators of that. And they have some sheriff's deputies who assist in that work. So that is available and has been utilized in the city of Portland and throughout the region. So I'd be hesitant to duplicate, though I understand your point, and further connections with parks, which we work on with in terms of their contracting for their removal system of trash, but also talking about as they've established recycling stations out at some of their more sports-related parks. So we have cooperation with them, but direct funding we've not sought to establish at this time.
The reality then is actually some of Metro's fee actually gets shared with the locals. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's not the fee, but the workforce
Yeah.
that goes out and does the cleanup
Right.
those services are provided within the city, including, my understanding, if it's reported in the parks, though park teams frequently see it first and want it removed immediately.
Right.
So we would be happy to do further contact on that.
Okay, great, thanks.
Just a sec, Chris. So I forgot to mention this is a hearing, so if there's anybody who is looking to testify today, if you could fill out a testimony card in the back of the room and then bring it up to Julie, I'd appreciate it. Chris, go ahead.
Well, since we're asking questions now, I want to get a question on the record that I had asked in prior briefing. Solid waste represents a lot of the heavy vehicles on our streets. We know that other jurisdictions have addressed their Vision Zero objectives in part by requiring side guards and mirrors that reduce blind spots on heavy vehicles. And I've asked this question in past years, and I understand that this year there is some progress, and that the next time regs for these trucks are issued, we're likely to see some progress on that objective. So could I get that response on the record?
Yes, Commissioner. So, in fact, yesterday we had an internal meeting. BPS is prepared to work with PBOT and to coordinate our efforts through the Vision Zero program that you referred to, as well as establishing some next steps for the improvements to safety improvements to haulers' vehicles that we oversee. In other words, there are many heavy trucks out there. Our authority relates to solid waste, and you've raised that before, and we've committed to go through our administrative rule process to work on a safer fleet, along with, obviously, the haulers who provide those services, own and operate those trucks, and have some extensive safety practices they've already established that I think would be very beneficial for all of us to be more aware of.
Great. I appreciate that progress, and I hope this will be the leading example for the city fleet and for other fleets that the city regulates. Thanks.
Are there any other questions? As a reminder, this is a hearing, so if you're here to testify, if you could fill out a card in the back of the room and hand it to Julie, who's sitting over here, we'll call you up. So take a break. Ariana, Bruce, thanks. I do have Beth Vargas Duncan.
Good afternoon. I'm Beth Vargas Duncan. I'm with Oregon Refuse and Recycling Association, and I'm here today with Dave White, whom some of you may recognize. He is the Regional Director of Oregon Refuse and Recycling Association, and we're here today representing the Portland Haulers Association. Dave is going to be retiring at the end of June, so that's why there's two of us, and I'm up here because I've been hired to take his position, for better or for worse. This is what you're going to get. So I know Dave's been wonderful, so I'm gleaning as much as I can in the next several weeks before he flies off to the beach or some wonderful retirement place. So as you've heard from Ariane and Bruce, the city staff, we have been working over the last few months with city staff on the annual rate review process. It is a robust and thorough process, and the haulers work cooperatively with city staff and provide very detailed information, as they've noted some examples, and share that with the city staff to come up with the rate calculations. The city's rate consultant reviews takes this information, looking at cost of service, and projects into the coming year. And the haulers and city staff collectively discuss the calculations, the projections. The haulers, and we also retain, the Portland haulers also retain a CPA serving as our rate consultant through the process. Everyone is able to talk, ask questions. It's a very collaborative process. So obviously through the process we don't always agree, but I'm glad to say that there is agreement here today regarding the change in rates. We believe that the process has been fair and results in reasonable rates for the haulers, citizens of Portland, and the customers we serve. The haulers, regarding efficiency,
You are limited in your time, but since I don't have any other testimony cards, please feel free to
okay.
finish up.
Thank you. I
Uh-huh.
appreciate that. I
Yep.
could wrap up really quickly. but, probably just a minute or two more, so I appreciate that. So we operate a very efficient service here, clean and sustainable. And as mentioned, over the last 4 years, the rates have not changed as a result of all of these efforts. So one thing that the haulers have proposed and mentioned to city staff, and we plan on working together, is we would like to transition away from the use of cans. So that means you have to pick it up and take it to the end of your driveway, and the hauler also has to get out of the truck, pick it up, and put it into their truck. So we have an automated system. It's modern and efficient. The city's been great. The haulers have been great in working toward that system. And we would like to fully transition to a carted system. So customers may roll the carts to the curb, and the haulers may use their automation to efficiently pick those up. And we have about, it's my understanding, about 12% customers each year. That number's been going down, natural attrition. But we'd like to speed up that process a little bit. So we're hoping that maybe by this time or July of next year, we could transition to a fully carted system and not have any more of the manual labor. It would increase efficiencies, as I've noted, and also really save the backs of customers and especially the drivers that are lifting many, many of those cans a day. So we're hoping to be able to come back maybe later this summer with a plan for the plan to transition. And that's really all I have. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today.
Andre, and then Gary.
So my favorite subject, the cans. It is my understanding that some of the haulers in Portland gave out the carts to just make their transition easier, and then some of the haulers have not. So is it I mean, I guess the incentive is, I would be interested in seeing how that incentive works for the people that have already taken the initiative from individual haulers and done that already, relative to the other people that didn't see the incentive for their service and are looking for the city to help them make that incentive. So some people already, from a business standpoint, see the good of the cart and make that service free to their customers, I guess. So I'm not looking for an answer today, but in your proposal,
Sure.
how do we, for the people that are already taken the incentive, how do we keep them kind of whole and not, from a citizen standpoint, not provide people that didn't see the incentive, give them money to do something that other people saw that was already a good idea?
If I may, Chair, I can address that briefly. So you're absolutely correct. There are two companies in Portland that I believe, in conjunction to their moving to automation, just purchased all carts and said, this is what we're going to do as part of our business model. And so there are two companies that are fully carted, and the others are at varying degrees of being fully carted providers. So what the haulers just most recently, as of even yesterday, have been addressing this topic, and what they're proposing at the moment is to go ahead and by July 1 of 2018, transition to fully carted. So that would mean that the companies, the haulers, would need to purchase carts up front, and then recognizing an annual rate review from March to May, thereabouts, each year, they would be able to look at those expenses, presuming they would have invested in the carts necessary to move to a fully carted system. Then that expense would be part of the rate review for this next year and would be considered as an expense, if that makes sense.
It does, but I would want to see the other side of the ledger. How much are you saving by making that investment of the 12%? So that we have 12% in the 32-gallon can. And so if the two haulers represent so much, we've already captured that value somewhere in the calculation, I assume, today. So the other 12% that comes through, yes, I understand you're going to have to buy 35-gallon cans, but there's a savings of efficiency, and hopefully they'll balance. So there's really hopefully no rate increase for the customer. And I would be interested in seeing that, because if it's just a cost to the customer,
It would clearly be a benefit to the customer too. I believe they would get a little larger cart. There is under the current rate structure that's presented today, the differential is 65 cents, so it's an additional 65 cents a month to move from a 32-gallon can to a 35-gallon cart. But I couldn't speak. This is why we retain, with all clarity here, why we retain CPAs and economists to look at this. I couldn't speak to the saved drive time or getting out that kind of labor versus smaller cans. So that would kind of be the calculation and review for next year.
Gary?
Hi, a couple of questions. Is the use of cans associated with worker injuries more so than use of carts?
It does cause much more stress to the driver. I don't have any statistics for you, but I know I have heard anecdotal information from the haulers that they have had injuries related to that strain that's just from lifting the carts, compared to, obviously, the automated system is much easier. And in fact, haulers have also, operators have also noted that it allows a broader diversity among the workforce to have a fully automated system, so that we can have folks that maybe don't have the same physical ability, they can work into their
You don't have to
with
be
all
a
due
big,
respect, older
strong
years
sanitation
or,
worker anymore.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it helps to move to automation.
The other question was on what the fate of the cans will be, the existing cans. And I know we're in a hybrid situation where we have a couple of city-provided carts for recycling and yard debris, but we have a plastic rolling cart that we've owned for garbage. What's going to happen with that? Or maybe I should ask more generically, to what extent will your plan include options to sustainably manage the waste that's created by no longer using a can?
So it's my understanding that the can is privately owned by the customer at this point, and so it really would be the customer's choice how they manage the use of that can. But the carts obviously are owned by the haulers, and then they take care of the carts. So going forward, that would be all property of the garbage haulers.
And
I
the
don't-
suggestion.
I'm not
this-
certain if I'm answering your question.
Well,
though.
no, the suggestion I'm making is that you include in your planning a way to help customers recycle what's going to be an unused galvanized can or an unused plastic can. That's something
I
they
don't,
should
we
take
could
into
look into that. We certainly
consideration.
could look into that. I'm not certain if all of those items are recyclable, but we could look into that.
Okay, thanks.
Are there any other questions? No? Thank you, Beth. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else who would like to testify? If so, please sign a little card. I'm not seeing anybody stand up. It's a small room, so it'd be hard to miss you if you wanted to. So with that, we'll close the hearing portion. Come on back up, Bruce and Ariane. Are there any additional questions for? Yes, go ahead, Eli.
Thanks. I like the proposal in terms of skewing the rates to encourage smaller cans. And I like that the numbers that those are hit at, but I am interested by this comment of whether it makes sense to provide a little price incentive to get rid of the can, because that's a different kind of public policy benefit. And perhaps there might be a skewing of that 32, may give someone basically a more of a discount or more of a cost bump if you're going with the can, or a one-time. I mean, sometimes people respond better to one-time offers, like you get $10 off, or you get one pickup free, or something like that if you just get rid of the can and switch over to the roll cart. So I'm just interested to hear if there might be some price signal that could be provided, much like you're incentivizing smaller cans, but incentivize people to switch to roll carts.
Thank you. We'll make sure as we review kind of some next steps on that, before we come back to the commission, that will be included, as well as the other points brought up by Mr. Oxman, Mr. Baha. So we will address these.
Thank you, Bruce. So Andre and then Jeff.
Two things. Last year in our letter, we put that we wanted to look at the ability to have MWSB participation, minority women, small business participation in the franchise component. My understanding is now this year you're going into that franchise relook. So again, I'd like to make sure that we have that as part of that franchise relook, and we include that, Chair, in our letter to council. The second part is with the recycling and the commercial side. As part of the climate action plan, there's a requirement for all the trucks to meet a emission standard. That is impactful for the small businesses that are in the commercial side, which is not regulated. The residential side we've paid for those trucks for the haulers to be able to, as part of the rates, to be able to be new standards, but the commercial side we haven't. And so I'd like to look at, for next year, coming up with a way that we can use part of that rate to help these small businesses, because without some kind of help, there may be some small businesses that go out of business in that market.
May I address both of your?
Yes.
These? So you've referred to our franchise review, which we are proposing to bring back, and we've bring back to this commission as the first step in a launch that we would ultimately go to council and begin what we call the midterm review of the franchise. It's a 10-year agreement. We've discussed this briefly with you before, but the issue you have raised about minority and women-owned businesses, that's definitely going to be part of it. So it was raised last year in rates because we didn't really have any other forum to address that concern. So it will be part of our consideration, and we will be coming back to you. I believe it's scheduled next month, right? The beginning of the franchise review. So that's number one. And secondly, about the clean fleet. So we've initiated this process, and it was adopted by City Council to give the directive to all haulers providing collection service in the city of Portland. It was adopted in 2008. As part of that plan, we we began the work with the requirements in the residential section that began in 2016, last year, and the commercial sector will begin next year. So we've notified the haulers, and I'm sure what you're referring to is you're hearing some of them say, gosh, my trucks have to be 12 years old or newer. And so we will take a look at what you're saying is take a look at those considerations and what the impact may be on the service provider. But any of their existing equipment, labor, all the other disposal costs are already passed along to a commercial business that they service as part of the rates charged by those haulers. And so I'm not trying to diminish the issue of saying, gosh, a newer truck, that's going to be costly. But just want to be mindful that those any equipment costs, any of their other operating costs are already passed along to business customers. And so that we will address that, the clean fleet requirements that we have, we will get back on that topic.
I'm going to be clear. I'm not asking to buy new trucks as we did in the residential side. I'm not trying to say that. I think there's a number of alternatives in terms of replacement of engines, looking at, combining with maybe some other grants and things to just provide some assistance to some of those small businesses. I think there's a value there and a policy there that the city of Portland has in moving forward around the climate action plan. And I fully support the action in the climate action plan. I'm not saying we should diminish that in any way. Just how do we help those businesses?
Okay, thank you.
So Jeff and then Maggie.
I just had a brief comment. I want to thank your staff and also thank the haulers. I think it's great when through efficiencies and collaboration, we don't have a fee increase. I don't think there are many fees in the city of Portland that don't just go up as a matter of course. So as a garbage paying homeowner, I appreciate that. So thank you for your efforts, and maybe you can match it again next year.
Maggie.
So this is a follow-up to Andre's question. I'm actually now curious, one, if one, is a concern largely diesel, if the engines are diesel operated?
Yeah.
Okay. Two, has this been a discussion in, diesel reform conversations at the legislature and in Cleaner Air Oregon and in the VW settlement? Like, Because from my perception, the focus has been largely on school buses and drayage trucks for retrofits. And I have no idea, like, what if garbage trucks do have a disproportionate impact on low-income communities and communities of color? Garbage trucks for commercial use. So I guess that's another question is, do you have a map of that pattern of routes, or for the commercial vehicles, or is that just too complicated because they literally are all over the place?
We have the pattern of where the collection occurs, but the biggest difference in business and residential, the residential is set up with regular weekly service for garbage and composting, every other week collection on garbage. But businesses, some of them are collected almost every day with size limitation or volume of garbage. So to come up with that actual pattern of where it's getting collected, we do not have that information right now. What we have noticed, you've referred to diesel engines. Well, that's the predominant truck engine that's used by garbage haulers, but there has been a substantial switch to compressed natural gas, which has lower emissions, which is beneficial for the community, without a doubt. What we've tied our clean fleet standards to are the latest EPA emissions, the engine requirements, so that we are seeking, contrary to much of our reduce and reuse policies, is that older diesel engines prior to 2007 really need to be phased out. And the cleanest standards were adopted, or the latest and cleanest standards were adopted in 2010. So eventually, with our 12-year requirement, we're going to have a completely clean or less emitting diesel fleet, and that's our intention by these policies, or the policy that was adopted by City Council. We're working with hauling companies. Metro has another partnership with our regional government, has helped with diesel particulate filters that Andre was referring to. So some of the emissions have been reduced in the older vehicles, but eventually we're going to need to get to some of the newer, less emissions generating trucks, and that's the goal of this policy.
And that would be reached in 2022, because you're
That-
basing it off of 2010? So
Well, that's when it would come into full, the short answer would be yes. That's when all the trucks, or the primary trucks, would all have reached that switchover point. But we put that in that 12-year phase-in to begin in 2000, or it was adopted 2008, and next year is when the commercial vehicles will be required to meet that, and ultimately, in 2022, we should be in much better shape.
So, Chris.
So that prompts a slightly different question on my part, which goes back to why the commercial hauling is not franchised. And I was involved in this discussion, I don't know, more than 10 years ago, back in my neighborhood association days, when it was largely a conversation about noise and nuisance. Because I live in a mixed-use neighborhood. My pickup may be franchised, but if the apartment building next door, or the bar on the corner are not, you can, if you're particularly lucky, you can have 3 haulers in a night come by and pick up glass or do other things that are pretty noisy. And we had that debate, and the discussion tipped in favor of competition at that point. But what I'm wondering, based on Maggie's question, is, has anybody looked at the question of route efficiency and whether by franchising you would reduce the truck VMT and therefore the emissions, and how would that impact some of our other goals? So taking it out of the nuisance and into the energy efficiency and air toxics issue. Has anybody looked at that?
We've had some discussions, the most recent being in 2008, when the Portland Recycles Plan was adopted, because there was consideration, should those steps that you're referring to be addressed. It was chosen not to follow that path by City Council at that time. And it's something that certainly could take further analysis, but there are also other trade-offs that the business community would want to weigh in on as well.
So maybe that's something that could be evaluated in the context of the Climate Action Plan, and whether that could be a contributing action in a future plan.
Are there any other questions? Not seeing any, but any. Would anybody like to offer up a motion?
I move that we accept the rates as proposed and recommend them to City Council.
Second.
Thank you. So Mike's saying tie goes to Chris. Any further discussion? I'm not seeing anything. So Julie, go ahead and call the roll.
Aye.
Aye.
Yes.
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 Yes. That passes. So
Thank you
you
very
very much
much.
for all your hard work. Appreciate it.
Maybe I should ask for an instant replay.
We don't have time. Next item on the agenda is the Airport Futures Progress Report.
Jeff gonna come up later, or?
At the end of questions.
Okay.
Go ahead. He could sit up here, is that?
Doesn't matter. We'll just do that.
Call him up, writing
Yeah.
questions. He can
That
sit
sounds
forward.
So
Trust me to do that, or?
There we go.
interesting.
Good afternoon.
Thanks, Tom.
So today we have a briefing and an update on the Airport Futures program. Airport Futures was adopted by the city in 2011, and you have in front of you the 2016 annual report for the airport. So we're 5 years into this. The significant thing about the Airport Futures process was on the land use side, the airport itself went from a 10-year conditional use master plan situation to a planned district that sits in the zoning code. And at the same time, we created a PDX Community Advisory Committee that has a host of neighborhood and community organization representatives. Katie Larcell from the PSC currently serves on that. And myself as the BPS representative, also part of the coordinating committee. This advisory committee meets quarterly and is a sort of clearinghouse and sounding board for all the issues dealing with the airport and the offsite impacts. With me today is Sean Loughran from the port, and he sort of is the keeper of the Airport Futures Plan and makes the development out of the airport run. And so he's going to give you an update on what's been happening over the last 5 years and where we're headed. And then we also have Jeff Owen, who's the current chair of the advisory committee here as well, to talk a little bit about that process and answer any questions that you have. So I'm going to turn things over to Sean.
Great, thanks, Tom. I'll also recognize behind me, we've got Joe Smith. If you raise your hand, Joe. Joe's also got the distinction of being on the Community Advisory Committee. He gets the added bonus of also getting to serve on the Citizen Noise Advisory Committee. You have to serve for a long time with distinction to get assigned to both committees. It was actually nice at the beginning of this meeting because Catherine, who welcomed you to the building, actually, I think Joe appointed her as the first Planning Commission representative in 2007 when we started this process. So we have had a Planning Commission representative engaged in this process and a staff member since 2007, and we're really grateful for the city's participation in that. Tom was good enough to give us a sense of some of the topics that you're most interested in. We like to certainly get out to give you an update, really a progress report on where we're at in terms of planning and development at the airport and the activity of the Community Advisory Committee. We try to do the same for the City of Vancouver because in addition to the City of Portland, they are also a sponsor of this committee, which I think has been a great success. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. We want to talk a bit about the forecast because like with any planning process, the city's going through its comprehensive master plan process here recently, the comp plan, but really the forecast and what we expect is foundational to what we do and as we look at the requirements. Tom gave a little brief description of the plan district, but really that was one of the key outcomes. We'll talk a little bit about that. The advisory committee itself and what they've been busy with in the last couple of years and really the last few years. And then what's going on in terms of major activity at the airport. There is a lot of growth at the airport, just like there is a lot of growth everywhere in the city these days, and we'll give you a little insight to what's going on there now and what we can expect there really in the next few years. And I can guess probably where the question came from, but a little update on the PDX Wildlife Management Program. So some of these topics I'm qualified to speak to, otherwise some of them I'll do my best. We'll see how we do here. When we started this process back in 2007 is when we really started the airport futures planning process. But the prior master plan, actually, we finished it in 2000. And we immediately began in 2001 a process with the city to set up the structure for that planning process. So we've been at it in its current form at PDX for a very long time. And had the city participating along with us that whole time. It was a collaborative process, both with the City of Portland. I'll also say with the City of Vancouver, because it was quickly realized that the service area for the airport is bigger than just the Portland metropolitan area, and really an opportunity to engage the community itself. It was a 3-year planning process. Again, I said it started in 2007. We actually adopted it in spring of 2011. We had a 30-member advisory committee and an extensive public engagement strategy that went with that. In addition to the planning advisory group meetings, we had many subcommittee meetings on a range of topics from forecast to sustainability, and then a great number of stakeholder meetings. Pretty much if you had an interest, we would go out and we would talk to you about our master plan process. As we talk about the entirety of what Airport Futures was, it really had 3 core products. We had the Airport Master Plan, which for us is a facility plan, comes in about a 6-volume set that sits on my shelf. We also had the City Land Use Plan. So the City Land Use Plan, there were amendments to the comprehensive plan, there were amendments to the zoning code, and then also to the zoning maps. And we also had this commitment at the start of the process that we were going to have some sort of ongoing public engagement strategy. That took the form of the Community Advisory Committee. I don't think anyone expected when we started that planning process in 2007 that we would have had a consensus recommendation, but indeed at the end, I think credit to the process, again, the length of the process, the effort that went into it, we did have a consensus recommendation that came out of it. Again, adopted in 2011, and that adoption was by Port Commission. We adopted our master plan. Portland City Council, after it went through the Planning Commission process here, adopted the land use planning, and Vancouver City Council, because they're a co-sponsor on our Community Advisory Committee, they also adopted that over with the City of Vancouver. And then kind of memorializing all that are 3 intergovernmental agreements between the City of Portland, the Port of Portland, and the City of Vancouver. So I want to talk a little bit about aviation demand forecast, because if you think about it, our master plan, mostly we finished it in 2010. We adopted it in 2011. But because the forecast is foundational to the work, the base year for that was really 2007. So it's about 10 years really since we looked at that work. When we did it, we were taking a pretty innovative approach to looking at the forecast. Metro Sense does their forecasting the same way. It's a probabilistic look, which looks at the likelihood of a potential range of future outcomes. Really what you're trying to do is assess the risk associated with any future level of activity. We looked at over 30 different issues and trends associated with that, and then we also did a sensitivity analysis to look at thoughts like, what if we had high-speed rail between Portland and Vancouver? What would be the effect on aviation demand, particularly with the Seattle shuttle that includes so many operations between Portland and SeaTac. Looked at oil prices, we looked at a whole range of different issues. So what are we trying to do as we look at the forecast this day is just confirm or validate that it's still appropriate for planning purposes. And so what we do is we do a regular refresh of the forecast. We go back and look at those key issues and trends. We try to assess what's going on in the industry itself, and then take another look ahead. So the most recent one we did was about a year ago, June of 2016. And what we do is on a regular annual basis, we bring that forecast update back to the Community Advisory Committee so they can continue to kind of gauge where we're at today compared to where we had forecasted it earlier. In June of last year, what we found is that we were within 1% of what we had forecasted, again, on that base year of 2007. I'd love to take credit, but it's a lot of luck, it's some art, and it's some science. So a lot goes into being on the money when it comes to forecasting. We also do a lot of modeling at the airport, so we're constantly assessing how many gates we need, how many contact gates we need for aircraft, how many overnight parking places we need for aircraft, because we have more aircraft overnight at PDX than we have gates to accommodate them. It has to do with the productivity of the gates themselves. And then we're always looking at other industry forecasts. That might be Boeing does a global aviation forecast, and the Federal Aviation Administration does what's called the terminal area forecast. So what are the things that are really influencing activity at PDX? And when you look back at that period of time since 2007, a lot has happened. I know that the city and others are looking at these same issues as you look at long-term growth. But we had just adopted our forecast, and on the heels of that, we had the Great Recession, financial credit crisis. We saw oil prices go from $50 a barrel to over $150 a barrel, and we saw extensive restructuring in the industry itself. The result of that is we lost a lot of service at PDX, 12%, approaching 2 million passengers at the peak, significant reduction in seat capacity. In the meantime, we saw that restructuring in the industry, airline consolidations. The most recent one you've probably heard of is Alaska and Virgin America. So with all of that, there were also some significant changes in the aircraft fleet. So the cost of fuel for those aircraft for the first time exceeded the cost of labor. That had never happened before. With that, it caused the airlines to take a real hard look at that fleet, and they had a lot of older aircraft that were in that fleet. So they had all these new aircraft deliveries. The benefit of that is that it's more fuel efficient. It has more seats on those. So if you looked at, say, our main aircraft is a 737 20 years ago, that 737 to today is a very different aircraft. It's a much larger aircraft, a lot more seats in it. In addition to that, the airlines got pretty good at managing capacity. And when I say that, what do I mean? You used to get on a plane and maybe you had an empty seat next to you. Who has that happen ever anymore? So they got pretty good at managing capacity. And so not only was there more seats, but the seats now were fuller. We call that load factor. So in the old days, we used to do our forecast and we used to kind of base our estimates on a 70% load factor. These days, most of the aircraft flying out of PDX, it's over 80% full, and on a lot of flights, it's over 95% full. That causes other issues, which we could talk about at length, but the aircraft are full. But those new aircraft also caused some other challenges. One, it had the benefit of new routes, had the benefit that those aircraft are also much quieter than the old fleet used to be. So the noise contours, we've been able to manage that issue much better at PDX. But those new aircraft, because they're different sizes, created a new set of challenges for us as well. But as you look at new service, we now have we have 17 airlines, and we've got a growing number of nonstops, 77 nonstops from Portland. International, we're actually the smallest airport in the United States to have international service to both Asia and to Europe. We've worked really hard to sustain that, particularly through the recession, but we have a growing number of international nonstops as well. So let's take a look back at the forecast that we did some time ago. What you see is the dark blue line through the center, that's actual activity. And this is, I'll stop for a minute and say, this is titled end plane passengers, and that's just means essentially half the passenger volume at PDX. Those are people getting on aircraft. The people getting off, we call those deplaned passengers, so that we have a code that no one else can understand. And the total we report as million annual passengers. So when you look at this, you really kind of want to double that. But if you look at the 13.4, what that's saying is we've got a projection of about 27 million annual passengers by 2035. And that was our most likely or 50th percentile forecast that we used primarily for planning purposes. What you can see in the dark line is you can see the result of the recession, where that dark line goes down to what we would say is the lowest range of the forecast, or the 10% likelihood range there on the very bottom. And you can see that today, as of our 2016 traffic, we're just a little bit above what that median range forecast is. So I would say we're definitely well within forecast range. Last year, again, we were within 1% of forecast, and it's certainly suitable for planning purposes for us in spite of all the things that have happened.
Can I ask a question about that? So my understanding is that what came out of the last major planning process was a trigger for when we start to raise the third runway question again. Is that trigger calibrated in terms of passengers or takeoffs and landings?
That's a great question, and that's my next slide.
Oh, great, thank you.
So really, that was one of the big questions when we went into this planning process to begin with. And the trigger for it, most of what we do at the airport is related to passengers, but the airfield and the runway capacity itself is related to operations. So when we talk about aircraft operations, it's takeoffs and landings that are in that total number. Again, we're forecasting the total operations, and we're looking at what's the fleet mix, how full is that aircraft fleet, all those different variables that I mentioned. In this case, you can see the 50th percent forecast is for 378,000 aircraft operations by 2035. And what you can see is the dark line is actual aircraft operations. What I would point out is that in the 90s, it's actually about 1998, we had our highest level of aircraft operations, and we were at about 330,000 aircraft operations in about 98. Today, we are at about 224,000 annual aircraft operations. So more than 100,000 less than where we were at, although we're serving a much higher volume of passengers. So that's a great story for us. Keep in mind, too, if you drew a bar across the top at 500 500,000 operations. That's what we believe is the practical capacity of the existing airfield at PDX, about 500,000 aircraft operations. We think it could even be higher than that because NextGen, which is kind of the new method of managing air traffic with new technologies, has some capacity opportunities that would be available even at PDX, where our runways are a little closer together than they are at other airports. But at any rate, where we're at today and what we believe is the capacity of our airfield, we have a long ways to go before we would have to consider a third parallel runway.
Thanks.
We talked a little bit about the plan district here too. What you have depicted on there is the plan district. Essentially, we have the airport district. To the south, we have a sub-district. The airport proper is most of the hatched area. We've got about 3,400 acres that is kind of the active airport area, essentially the aircraft operation area and terminal facilities. You have a cutout in there because Cascade Station and Portland International Center was already a planned district. That came about in about 2000, 2001 as light rail was brought in to the airport. So that was a separate planned district already. There were a lot of benefits that have come from it. As Tom mentioned, we used to be a conditional use. Now we're an allowed use. We don't have to go through that conditional use process every few years, every about 10 years or so. With the city, it also kind of recognized a lot of the characteristics that were unique to the airport, had the benefit of, with respect to wildlife management, now the landscaping standards within this area are the airport plant list. In addition to this, there are overlays that are related to aircraft noise and to height of structures or objects around the airport. So all of those were updated as part of the airport plan district. It allowed for accessory uses like hotels and that have occurred in the airport district over time. It also created a new public contact requirement and identified the Community Advisory Committee as the place where that information would be shared. So what we do is for new development above a certain dollar amount, those get noticed to all the neighborhoods around the airport, to the neighborhood coalitions. They get an opportunity to come to a Community Advisory Committee meeting, provide input to the Community Advisory Committee at that meeting. But in my opinion, it's been a great improvement. I think what we've got out of it is people have a venue where they can learn about the ongoing planning and development of the airport. They can provide input to the committee, and they have just got a number of opportunities that didn't exist before we do that. So with that, I'll talk a little bit about the Community Advisory Committee itself, and we have a member and we have the chair that are here with us today. But it was to foster kind of meaningful and collaborative dialogue about the ongoing planning and development of the airport. It was to give that opportunity for people to interact with decision makers, and I would say Vince Granato, who's our Chief Operating Officer, he goes to every one of these meetings. He gives an airport business update at every one of these meetings, and he fields questions. It's usually one of our first orders of business when we have these, if we don't have a public notice item to come first. We always try to do those first and give people an opportunity if they've got public comment to go right away. But I think it's raised awareness of what's going on at the airport. When we think of the membership of the committee itself, people that have that opportunity, we look at them as liaisons for us in the community. They can always ask us to come talk at their neighborhood associations. They bring these issues and topics back to their neighborhood associations. The port can't be out in the community like these different representatives are, so they're really our eyes and ears out in the community. I think that's been a great benefit. It is 30 members, 20 voting members. There's 10 ex officios, people like the port, the city, and others. It's diverse, it's regional. Like I said, we continue to have Vancouver and Clark County represented on that committee as well. We meet quarterly and we cover a very broad range of topics. I'm going to say we cover topics that we certainly didn't anticipate when we started this process a few years ago. The committee does regular reporting to the sponsors and to the appointing organizations. So we've got really that two-way communication that occurs. There has been a lot that's happened at the airport since the Community Advisory Committee was created. And the Community Advisory Committee, I would say, has had their hands on the pulse of the airport and a lot of the things that have occurred, and had the opportunity to really provide direct and meaningful input. I'm proud to say, and actually Joe went to Salem to accept the award. We were recognized by the Oregon Department of Land Conservation and Development for our process. I know the city received a similar acknowledgement for its work on the comprehensive plan. We're proud to get that acknowledgement. We think the committee has certainly done the work to earn that. We have gone through 3 phases of our concessions redevelopment at the terminal. So our concessions program at the terminal is a nationally recognized and award-winning program. People know it for a number of things. One, for street pricing. We were one of the first airports to have a street pricing program. Secondly, because it's local. When we think of the airport, we think of it as a gateway to the Pacific Northwest. We think of it as gateway to Portland. And when you come to Portland, we don't want it to seem like any other airport. We want it to seem uniquely like Portland's airport. And that concessions program has an awful lot to do with it. We have one member of the Community Advisory Committee that participates on the team that selects the future concessions at the airport. And again, that's gone through 3 phases. We've had 3 different participants on it, and there's actually an RFP process going on right now, and we have a representative that's participating. Social equity, when I say things we didn't anticipate when we created this committee, I would put that in the category of things I didn't anticipate when I became a planner. But it's been a really great conversation for the Port of Portland. We've benefited greatly from the Community Advisory Committee and their input. We set up a subcommittee because this topic had such great interest on the committee, and I give them great credit for the Port now having a social equity policy, a PDX workplace initiative, and a lot of outcomes that are ongoing in that area as well. Our natural resource program, so we had a natural resource program created out of Airport Futures. We have mitigation in advance of development that occurs out on Government Island. That's 300 acres of grassland mitigation. We have an urban tree canopy program. Right now, we partner with Friends of Trees to do that. That's $724,000 over 20 years. And we also have a slough restoration program, which a subcommittee looks at projects, and we fund projects every year in our slough restoration program as well. That's a little over $1 million over the planning period. Public notice I talked about, but again, that's getting the word out on the things that we're talking about. Connectivity to the community, and I would say this has gone both ways, whether it's the Community Advisory Committee lending their support to area efforts like the Cully Community Park, or us asking for letters of support from the CAC for projects that we've wanted to see happen, like a multi-use path on Cornfoot Road there on the south side of the airport. So there's been great benefits, I think, both ways. And I mentioned some of the ad hoc committees, but we've had a number of groups. Social equity was certainly one of those groups that was very involved. Our environmental objectives and targets and stormwater. We've had lots of ongoing committees. So just a quick look at kind of major projects going on at PDX. We are a busy place now if you go out there with construction, but we've only just begun. So the outcome of this plan is we're really building a lot, and it's going to be a busy place. We call this kind of development program PDX Next. It is really, I say, putting us in a position to continue to be America's best airport for the next 20 years. And I'll just give you a quick look at some of the different projects. This slide got a little bit cut off, but if you are familiar with PDX, it's what in the industry we would call an H-pier terminal. Essentially, it looks like an H. On the top part of that slide, there's actually Concourse D that goes out to the west, and there is Concourse E that's going to the east. So right now, we've got a project, I'll show some slides, which is to expand Concourse E going to the east. And the reason we're doing that is that right now we have over 70% of the business on the south side of the airport. So if you went to the airport and you were flying on Alaska Airlines or flying on Southwest or American, you're on the south side of the airport. So what's happened is it has overburdened the security checkpoint on the south side, and the part of the airport that you can't see, the baggage system can't handle the volume of baggage. So what we need to do is we need to have a redistribution of passengers within the same space. So how do you move the airlines around to make that work? So the goal is to have more or less a 50-50 split of traffic within the terminal building. This is the E extension. So as you approach the terminal building, this will be on your right. If you were to go in there today, you'd see a bunch of Jersey barriers. Those Jersey barriers are allowing for us to continue to have a multi-use bicycle and pedestrian path to the front of the terminal while we construct this project. So we're going to get 6 aircraft gates plus ground loading that'll happen off of the east end. And this is where Southwest Airline is going to get relocated to. Again, this is how it looks coming into the airport as you go to arrivals or departures. On your right-hand side, and again, the area where you see the greenery, that's going to be the multi-use path that continues to go straight to the front of the terminal. Rendering of the inside of the space as well. Again, trying to have as much daylighting within the space as we can. I'll see a lot of recurrence of a lot of the themes that exist at the airport today. So really having some continuity of design there is one of the goals. Kind of one of the other areas we're looking at, so an outcome of Airport Futures, an outcome of our master plan, is that we try to have a more compact form of development. So if anyone remembers that after 2000, what we were looking at a new decentralized terminal to the south of the existing terminal envelope. And through this process, we said, no, the more sustainable path is to look at redevelopment opportunities within the existing terminal envelope and to maximize the utility of what we have before we try to build something new. That's easier said than done, and what we found is building in this footprint is a really complex place to build. But what we've set out to do is to accommodate most of our development within what I call that existing terminal envelope between the 2 parallel runways and in the area that's currently part of the loop road that serves the terminal. So what we're trying to do, and I would also look back to that last master plan, we used to propose that our next rental car facility would be a consolidated remote facility in Portland International Center. But when we, through that planning process, heard from what our customers wanted, they wanted everything to be in walking distance to the terminal. And one of the things they liked most about Portland was the walkability of the space. So when we've divided this out into a grid, we've looked at what we think reasonable walking distances are. As a result, we've said we want to keep the rental cars in close to the terminal, minimizes the number of shuttle bus trips that we'll have between the terminal and a potential remote location. With that, we also want it to be a shared use facility, so it won't just be rental cars, it will also be public parking. So it's meeting our next increment of public parking. In the blue is what's called the quick turnaround area, or the QTA. That's where the rental cars wash, service, and fuel their facility. If you were out at the airport now and you saw a giant concrete block, that would be the QTA. It doesn't look anything particularly interesting if you were to see it today. But the prior location, I don't know if this mouse works or not. Yes. The existing rental car QTA is in this triangle right here. The new one, again, is in blue right here. It is an incredibly inefficient facility in terms of its water use. The new QTA is going to be Envision, which is a program like LEED for environmental certification, but it is for manufacturing industrial buildings. You can get a LEED certification even for a runway project. This building has a lot of unique attributes instead of just being a sprawled out larger footprint, the parking for the cleaned and the dirty cars is going to be on the roof. The roof is also where we're going to collect all of the rainwater. We're going to use that in the wash facilities within the facility itself for the car washing. There's a production well that's been developed on site, so for the final rinse and that will all be from a production well that's adjacent to the building. So this is going to be a big gain for us in a lot of respects. It's going to be connected to the building in the yellow. The yellow building is the ready return, so that's where you go and you pick up your car with the keys in it. And that's the QTA, that's what's under construction today. If you see that going into the airport, you'll know what that is. This is kind of the toughest nut to crack that we have. It's the core terminal area. I would call it the core processing area. So if you go in, this is where the ticket counters are at. It's also where the security checkpoint is at. It's also where the Oregon market is. This is really the key to meeting our needs for the long term. So what we've said is, we know this is the right location. How do we get the flexibility that we need to meet the long-term requirements? The space has got to be bigger, and the space has got to be more adaptable over time, which means if you went into that building today, it's actually 8 different buildings. It started in 1958. That's when the airport moved from the facilities that were developed in the 40s along the Columbia River to the current location. And since 1958, every period of construction has had a different seismic code attached to it. So this space, if you looked at it, is peppered with columns and brace frames and shear walls. And there's very little we can do to rethink this space without getting into it. It also isn't going to achieve the kind of seismic resilience we know we need for the long term. So right now we're thinking about how we redevelop the space to meet our long-term needs. We know we want to keep it where it's at. We're going to expand it to the west. It'll take away 2 aircraft gates as we expand it to the west. But we're going to create a processing zone that's going to have more space at the front of the building as people come in, more space for the ticketing, really more space for bag drop, allow us to really adapt to all the new and emerging technologies that are influencing aviation. We'll have a much bigger space and a much nicer space for the security checkpoint itself. We'll take most of the concession program that's been the Oregon market and we'll migrate that to the post-security side. What we've seen happen since 2000 is essentially people no longer want to have time pre-security where they would shop or get something to eat. They kind of want to put that whole awful process behind them, be able to relax a little bit on the other side, and then maybe they'll get something to eat or get a cup of coffee. So we need to adapt our program to reflect that. The pre-security has continued to decline for us. The post-security, there simply has not been enough space. Now, Portland, one of the unique things about Portland is we've got a higher meter greeter number than just about any airport in the country. Everybody likes to come there to pick up friends and family, and because of that, we will always have a pre-security program. There'll be coffee and cafes. We've got the new exits. We've tried to provide some of that outside with a better, more open and well-lit space. I wanted to talk just a little bit about our wildlife management program. I'm not the expert. Nick Atwell would be from Port staff, but he wasn't able to be here. But what I'd say about our wildlife management program, it's unique and it's been around a long time. The current version of the wildlife management program actually started in about 2002. It's not just the work of the port, but we've got a committee of folks that are really expert within the state, really within the region, that have helped us develop and implement that program. It's managed by Nick Atwell. He's the guy with the scope in the upper right picture, and he's got 4 wildlife techs. All of our staff since 2002 are all certified wildlife biologists, so I think that is uniquely part of Portland's program as well, and we certainly are a national leader. Kind of the 4 pillars of the program, if you think about it, basically 7 days a week from sun up to sundown, we're dealing with short-term operational strategies. How do we keep the airfield safe for aircraft operating in that environment today? That requires hazing. Now, kind of a key part of our program is we're trying to do the great majority of our work by the least lethal means. So we're trying to have management strategies that don't require us to take wildlife. Research and development is a second kind of core pillar of the program. This is prey-based studies, deterrence, and other research as needed. When you think about the airport, what you have to keep in mind, it's bordered by the Columbia River on one side, the Columbia River Slough. It's part of the Pacific Flyway. It's one of the single largest contiguous open grass areas in the metropolitan area. Because of that, it's also a great place for wildlife. We have a great diversity of wildlife. Long-term management strategies, really looking at compatible land use strategies, adaptation of the port's plant list to development that occurs around the airport was a great benefit of Airport Futures, other habitat management as well. Ongoing information and education. When we talked about sustainability in Airport Futures and having this program, it's not just good enough that we have a good program. We need to get out there and share what we know with other airports, because airports are part of a system. You don't deal with one airport in isolation. You're dealing with a system of airports. So to the degree we can, we continue to invest in ongoing education, our own research, and actually sharing that research with other airports around the country. One quick look we have is, as we look at different types of avian species at the airport, you can't treat all species the same. Some pose a risk and others don't. And some that might be subject to bird strike, maybe the severity of a bird strike with a smaller bird isn't the focus of our issues. So we're looking at how do we focus the greatest amount of our effort. And what we do is we look at severity. The red-tailed hawk shows up as really a focus of the program. One, there's a lot of them at PDX. Two, it's a pretty large, dense bird, so it's got the potential to do a fair amount of damage if there is a bird strike. As a result, I think one of the benefits of PDX is that we've got a team of wildlife biologists that have been charged with collecting data on that species for a long time. We've got over 100,000 observations on the airfield, over 120 strikes. Some of those have resulted in aircraft damage. We've got a trapping and translocation program. Some of those birds come back. Actually, I think on our website, if I'm not mistaken, you can track those birds. So we banned them all. You'll see a slide here, and you can see after Alaska Airlines helps us fly them north, what their journey looks like to get all the way back to PDX. And then we don't have to tag them again because they're already tagged. But, right, they're pretty remarkable in what they'll do to find their way back to what they thought was a great place to live. We keep these resident pairs on the airfield. We have 6. They've been a real benefit to the program. They establish a territory and they help keep other birds out of certain territories on the airport. But they do get struck a lot at PDX. They're the 5th highest. Again, just a quick look at how we capture, document, and then translocate those species. But we have, in a number of areas now, done a lot of research that I think has been of benefit, not just to PDX, but really to a lot of other airports as well. I will be happy to take questions, but I was also going to invite Jeff Owen, who's our chair of the Community Advisory Committee, up to say a few words as well.
Thank you very much. I don't think there's a ton I need to add to Sean's presentation, just besides the fact that I think it's pretty evident there's a lot of stakeholders at the table for the Community Advisory Committee. And we really do get into a lot of good debating of information and weighing a lot of the airport's impacts and benefits to the community. So I don't think any other additional information is needed, but I'm happy to also help answer some questions if there are some.
Thank you very much. We have time for a few questions. We're running up on our time limit here, but I see Mike's hand up and then Eli.
Well, a couple kudos. First, one is, as a traveler, I think it is the best airport in the country, personally. Secondly, it's a Bob Salinger approved wildlife management plan. It's a very high bar, And, you know, there were lots of problems that got worked through, and everything I understand continues to be an exemplary program. I have, since I have your ear, I should go to the Citizen Advisory Committee on this one, but I'm just going to repeat. Sean, I don't know if you remember, we did I'm sure you do, the policymakers ride where we were out at the airport.
Twice.
Pardon?
I think
A couple
twice.
times, yeah. Since you're going to be doing a lot of redevelopment, I really would love to see us put together a comprehensive bicycle transit information hub at the airport that would include bike rentals, kiosks. When you go into Oakland Airport, the first thing you see at the baggage area is a map of East Bay Regional Park District's parks and natural areas. I just think we have an incredible opportunity. I don't know if you read New York Times yesterday, take the A train, A as in Audubon, and it described all of the places you can go in New York City on transit to experience nature in the city. So I just think there's a great opportunity there. We've discussed it in the past, and it kind of got pushed off to the side. And I'll come back to your committee and make some recommendation on how we might proceed. But as redevelopment occurs, that's a fabulous opportunity.
I would say it's good timing because our chair also happens to be the multimodal representative for the CAC. So he's also the right person to carry that forward if you would like us to do that.
Yeah, that's a great challenge. I'll definitely give that more thought back to the CAC as well. I recently flew into Oakland and saw some of that myself too.
Eli, Teresa?
I'm curious because we have only so much industrial land and you own a lot of it. And with the proposal to pull some of the uses from surface parking at the fringe into, I assume, multi-story parking close in, I get curious whether there are opportunities to do, I know you probably wouldn't sell it, but long-term leases, like 30, 60-year industrial leases for some of that parking area that we freed up. And also, I've done work with Dignity Village, so I know the area at 33rd. It just seems like there's a lot of unused port property, and I just get curious whether you do long-term leases for industrial uses.
Good question. In fact, that's all we do. Because of the airport property and how the property was acquired, much of it with grants from the federal government, you can't sell any of what is considered an aviation property. We can only do long-term leases, but we are actively looking at long-term leases for a lot of those properties. The Community Advisory Committee, although it did not occur, actually has looked at two different proposals for industrial land development along 33rd. We call it the 33rd Field Site, but it is essentially 33rd and Marine Drive on the west side. So there are a lot of airport properties. Sometimes they look like they don't serve a purpose. They're open fields, but those are runway protection zones and other areas of the airport that they actually can't be developed. They have to remain as open areas, but that's not to suggest there aren't others that are absolutely available for lease.
Well, you're doing a couple of pretty impressive things, I think, in terms of the bird work and then also the Envision certification on the QTA. So I think it'd be interesting to have more signage in the airport because you're just standing around doing nothing anyway while you're waiting for your flight. And it could be useful and interesting.
Kind of an education outreach opportunity.
Toot your own horn, I think, is what she's encouraging. Are there any other questions? I'm not seeing anything. Thank you so much. It was very thorough and informative, and I appreciate all your time today. Next item on the agenda is a transportation system development charge update.
Traveled late.
Okay, you're
Ready,
on.
folks?
Thank you.
I know, it's my stuff. Sorry, my cluttery stuff. So good afternoon. My name is Christine Leon, and I am with the Portland Bureau of Transportation.
Art Pierce, also with the Bureau of Transportation.
Thank you for having us this afternoon, and we're going to give you an update on the Transportation System Development Charge Program. We're here to get your feedback on what you'll hear us call as the TSDC, which stands for Transportation System Development Charge, or just the SDC, the update. We would like,
You know,
what we're
why,
looking for.
while you have a little bit of a pause there, I'm going to ask a question to determine if I need to stand up again. Is this what we're going to see on your slides?
Yes.
Awesome, you guys
Okay.
rock.
So there-
I can
there-
stay sitting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's about 20 slides, and we're going to ask that you hold questions to the end so we can get through this. We're going to try to go pretty rapidly. At the end, what we're really going to ask you for is your supports. And we're recognizing your expertise as commissioners who have recently adopted the Transportation System Development Plan as well as the city's comprehensive plan. And so we value your input in this process. So again, we have about 20 slides we're going to walk through. I'm going to go first, and Art's going to cut away, and then I'm going to come back to it. So progressing through this, you just hit the arrow. No, you hit enter. You hit the mouse. Okay.
No. Use the roll.
We can just turn the page.
Okay, let's just do this. Okay.
Yeah.
So Portland is still growing, as you are aware, and our goals within the comprehensive plan and the transportation system plan support and manage growth. The Transportation Bureau's programs, regulations, and capital programs also allow for growth in allowing people to move about with a certain level of service. And that's related to predictable travel times, equitability, and safety. To provide for growth, new development can, we're still on slide 2, new development can contribute to the capital system. An SDC, specifically the Transportation SDC, is an assessment of development's fair share of accommodating growth. The SDC program is a funding mechanism based on an adopted rate study. The rate study is what we are adopting and updating. PBOT is a improvement-based SDC program. So one of the requirements that we have is we need to have a outward-looking, forward-looking capital project list. That is part of our program update as well. We first adopted our SDC program in 1997. We were the first in the city to have an SDC. We've been updating it every 10 years since then. All right, let's see if we can roll to slide 3 here. There are 3 components of the rate study: the methodology, the project list, and then the rates. And the rates really are, what are the trip rates generated by the individual land use and development types, and then what are the dollar rates that we assess each development that comes in for a building permit. Let's see here. I'm going to stay on the slide just for a second more. There are 4 key shifts in this 2017 update from the 2007 update. First, the base level of service is the existing system value per person trip. Second, the trips are shifting from vehicle-based daily trips to PM peak hour trips. This is a better reflection of all the modes of travel that people use. Third, it uses the established project list and our processes to build the Transportation System Development Charge capital program. And then lastly, it is community-centered, not committee-centered from the outreach perspective. So that's really the 4th component of the SDC update is our community outreach.
So the next couple of slides are going to talk about what we've done to make this a community-based update process rather than a small committee-based. So in 2007, we had a small citizens committee. Maybe it's not so small, it was about 40 people, whose focus was on building the project list from scratch and recommending a rate to charge development. The 2017 update that we are doing right now used the recently adopted TSP, project list as the base, and this decision allowed us to shift our focus from a committee to a community-based. We used our Bureau's Budget and Bureau Advisory Committee, the PBOT-BBAC, as our feedback loop since they had invested time in the TSP update. We provided them updates and they gave us input throughout the process. So through the process, which we really began in late 2015, we have met with 24 neighborhood business and community organizations, including meeting with you. I think we're the first ones to come and present to you with an SDC update. We've invited input and had discussions and considered the comments throughout the process. Several of the organizations that we met with a number of times, including neighborhood coalitions, city modal committees, and business associations. We also wanted to boost participation from communities that traditionally do not come and participate in civic processes. So we hosted an online open house with a video that explained our system development charge over a 2-month period. We also had the project list, the proposed project list, up for public comments. Additionally, we used Facebook to push out the open house, which resulted in 33,000 people seeing the TSD update link and the video, with 700 people clicking on the online open house. The online open house received more than 240 comments. So the rate study is up for public review right now and public input. The public hearing before council is scheduled for July 26th at 2:00 p.m. And as I mentioned, we would really like your support as commissioners of this committee. So we're going to shift focus a little bit and get into the weeds, covering 3 things: the methodology, the project list, and then our recommended rate. So I mentioned one of the fundamental shifts we are making in 2017 is the investment per person methodology. We still have an improvement fee. We still have to quantify trips that development make to the transportation system, and we still are forecasting growth. We're forecasting growth based on the metro model and the city's adopted model. The change is the base level of service becomes the current city transportation system value per person trip. We are also shifting to person trips, and this allows us to use better data than what our current system has used. So the current system goes back beyond 1997, way into the 70s, using the ITE, the Institute of Traffic Engineers, data from, in some cases, this 1970s suburban areas. And we've extrapolated that, and the system is not the best that we could use today. So again, this is a financing tool, and at the heart of it is quantifying development's fair share based on the trips and the impact they have to the transportation based on the growth that they are contributing to. Back in December, we had a resolution before council that supported us moving to this person trip methodology. And we are really one of the first in the country that are doing this. One of the other good things that you might be interested in hearing is by moving to the person trip model, it really provides a platform for conversation between the RTP and the TSP and site-specific development plans, and then back to the RTP, because we're not extrapolating data anymore. We can all talk about person trips, and we're counting things that matter to us.
We're not counting vehicle intersection delay as the primary thing that we're concerned about anymore. We're really counting what matters, which is how people move through our system with all modes. So I think I've spent some time already on why person trips. We did hire a consultant to critique our current methodology, and really I hit the highlights of what they found. This really is the better starting point for a multimodal system, and we will be collecting actual data on person trips as we move forward through the next 10 years. So I'm going to turn it over to Art now. He's going to talk about the project list, and then it'll come back to me at the end for the rate.
All right, thank you. Were any of you not here during the transportation system plan update? I don't recall. I think you all were here. Yeah, same group. Okay, that's great. So one of the, whew, all right. So you remember all this process that we went through. So over the course of over a couple of years, we worked to develop an updated transportation system plan investment strategy that we felt best complemented the comp plan's direction and goals, the Portland plan's direction and goals, and specifically advance some specific initiatives and focus around equity in particular. We were successful as an organization of agreeing that we should use, as the beginning of this conversation around the SDC as a funding tool, that we should use the year 1 through 10 list of the TSP as the beginning environment. So that was a really exciting moment for the planners on our side to hear that the sort of investment side is going to take policy into action. And so that's, I think, a great win. One of the key reasons why it's really important that we're here with you, I think, is that you helped us in shaping that list. And as we're heading to bringing the SDC list to City Council, your advice in terms of and feedback around whether we're doing a good job with following through on that earlier feedback is really important for City Council to hear, as they're hearing comments from the various stakeholders who maybe didn't like all the answers they'd heard during the TSP process and want to see if they can get a different answer through the SDC process. So in order to try to better explain how a TSP list comes to be, we've developed what we call the gumball machine tool, and some of you may have seen this already. But essentially, each of those gumballs are the entire 20-year list of the TSP and the unconstrained projects. So coming out of a variety of modal plans and area plans come ideas. And they are different sizes depending on the cost of those sizes of those projects, and they have different attributes to them. And what the job is through the TSP process and all the way through to the investment process is to sort through those and make sure that we're matching up the right investments with the right needs and to the right types of funding sources. So the process that you helped us with in the last stage was used a number of evaluation criteria. And if you'll remember that these were specific things that we went through in a fair amount of detail, looking at safety, vision zero, economic benefit, equity, neighborhood access, impact on climate, health, cost effectiveness, and public support. So those were all lenses that we used that allowed us to sort through that large field of projects into three groupings. One is the unconstrained list. Those are ones that we don't believe we have adequate funding in the next 20 years to accomplish. And then two components of the constrained list, a 1 through 10 list and 11 through 20 list. Again, breaking apart that list to be able to track sort of the timeliness of when we can get to those projects. A reminder of what that scoring process looked like. We used some of these maps when we presented to you back last year. But so this is the literal equity scoring of the projects. And so the projects in red received the high score of a 3, and the projects in dark blue received a 0 in terms of scored against equity. And so that helped us sort. Those discs essentially are shown a different way through this map. Similarly, another example is around safety. So the projects, this is actually preceding our Vision Zero adoption, but those projects greatly resemble the high crash corridor network that has now become known to us through the Vision Zero work that's been occurring in the last year. All of that first steps of the process is what then is giving us the beginning of that SDC environment. And then what we're then using as an agency is a series of sort of next steps around factors of, okay, which project do we think is the best one to put towards different grant funding mechanisms? Which ones do we think will be most competitive against which environments? Or ones that we really need to make sure that we're reserving agency resources to accomplish because we're not sure that another outside entity will provide funding to match us. Annually each year, that gets taken into a snapshot of an annual of our CIP So it's a 5-year snapshot of what we've accomplished to get funding for, and that gets shown and broken out in a year-by-year budget estimation that is what gets adopted by City Council every year. And there are those series of the factors that we're looking at in terms of grant competitiveness. Is there available match? We look at distribution geographically, community support and momentum that we're hearing, and then issues around other bureau partners, whether the projects are ready, and then also, again, equity analysis to make sure that we're following through on that commitment. Here is a graphical depiction of what starts to look again like spaghetti, but is a whole set of projects that our staff are proposing be included in the SDC eligible list, totaling about $600 million of total project cost. Very important to remember that SDCs are essentially the seed corn that we use to attract additional investment for the most part. So for only in very rare cases do we use SDCs as the majority of the funding. For the most part, we use it to attract outside resources, either from other agencies or from grant funding. In terms of flavor of what is included on that SDC list, so there's 2 pie charts here in your table, and if you're trying to sort of make sure you're tracking the dial correctly, the top right pie, so the 26 or 22% are the top, so that's Central City and multimodal, and if you go around to the left, down and to the left, that will be the order of each of those. So you'll see that almost half of the modal priority for those projects is active transportation. The next would be multimodal projects that are doing a number of different modes together, and then traffic freight investments, and then transit, which is primarily us partnering with outside entities to accomplish larger transit projects. Also a pretty broad distribution of projected SDC project investment across a number of geographies, with East Portland and the Central City being the 2 largest components of that list, but a fair amount of investment in a number of other parts of the city. I actually find this slide a little bit confusing, but I'll see if I can try to explain it. So if you're looking at the start with the blue. If you're looking on the left, maybe I should have Christine explain this one. But if you're looking at that the 10-year list of SDCs, it's about $600 million of the city portion of those projects. And then the next key piece that Christine will talk some about is how do we decide what to set the rate against, and how much of the projects can we expect to accomplish through that amount of rate setting. And so if we were to set the full amount, we would have this very large SDC charge and revenue stream. And then with each successive step down, the SDC is able to cover a progressively smaller amount of those projects in terms of what we can anticipate. One of the key changes that we did make this year also is we are proposing a broader SDC list than we have in the past. So rather than trying to get to a really narrow list, we're trying to keep a broader field that allows us to have more opportunities to match the funding against those protected projects. And so that does give us a different playing field than in past years as well, which I think will help us a lot in terms of those that are trying to solve funding puzzle challenges, to have a bigger set of options to throw against a specific opportunity. Yeah, I'll pass it back over to Christine.
So I will just say, on this, on the blue, the intent was to show the funneling process from the total need of the city, which is the 20-year list of $2.2 billion, down to what we have gotten on the TSDC list. You'll see, though, it's $494 million, because there's another $95 million that we've added on to that, which are the regionally significant projects, which we're contributing what we believe is our share as the city. On the orange, like Art said, are the options for the projected revenue for the next 10 years. And what's key here is we need a project list. That's the methodology that the Transportation Bureau is using. That will determine the rate, okay? But we have choices to make, which is we can discount that rate. And that's what I'm going to talk through now. So you can see if we funded the list at 100%, the rate we would charge development would be higher, okay? If we funded the list at a larger discount, we would get less revenue and be able to move the dial less on those capital projects that we want to invest in to support our transportation needs, okay?
I knew I should have had you explain it.
Well, you did a good job. It's just- So it really gets to what is the rate that we should set and what is the rate that we can set. So the math is pretty straightforward, although this makes it look kind of complicated. First, we start with the list. So what is our list of capital needs? That's that 589 million. So the city projects plus the large regional projects. And then what is the change in PM peak hour trips for the next 10 years between 2017 and 2027? And that's from households and employees. And you divide those and you get the projected cost per trip. So that $8,347 per PM peak hour trip is what we could charge if we wanted to fund 100% of the list. What you need, though, is the development's PM peak hour trips, right? Because an office building doesn't generate just one PM peak hour trip, it generates a whole handful of them. So the development's assessment would be their trip number times the dollar rate that we set, okay? The test, though, for the number here is based on our new methodology of the level of service that we have established as the existing system value. This number, this $8,347 per PM peak hour trip, is lower than our level of service, which tells us the projected cost per trip is an equitable amount that we can capture from new trips that will be fully attributable to growth. Okay, so that's what that's telling us. I don't have all the numbers in here from that test on the system value, but it is less. So that means we could go up some, but what we want to do is figure out what rate we should set that's going to be less than this. And the reason I say less is because historically the Transportation Bureau has been in the middle of the pack with other jurisdictions. So we've looked at other jurisdictions, other city bureaus, and then comprehensively the impact of our fee changes on the developers because they are the customer. So what you see here is there's current rates compared to other jurisdictions, and we got this from the League of Oregon Cities survey that they did for single-family rates. So here is our current rate, which is discounted. Council in 2007 decided to discount our total SDC recovery rate. So we are on the lower end. With the proposed changes in rate and methodology, we move with our transportation SDC to the middle of the pack. And I think the cat's already out of the bag, but I'm going to tell you, our director is recommending a rate that would fund 50% of the eligible list, not 100%, okay? So that still keeps us in the middle of the pack as far as the other local jurisdictions. And what we found in working with our consultants, Echo Northwest and Fear and Peers, is developers don't necessarily move to other jurisdictions because of transportation system development charge. Other jurisdictions have SDCs and fees as well. This shows the fourth from the right, our current SDC broken out by the 4 bureaus that charge an SDC today. Okay, so Water Bureau, BES, Parks, and then Transportation. Again, this is for a single-family residential development. The proposal that we have on the table, we're in orange here, shows how we make that shift from current place to moving up 2 places, okay? I'm going to go back here a slide. I think I already described this, but just the points here are we are recommending a 50% eligible list funding by the rates. Yeah, Gary?
Where does the 50% come from?
So I'll I'll get into why we selected the 50%. The other thing that we looked at, again, is the context of how this rate and overall the city's fees that we charge developments, where do they come from? So the Office of Management and Finance, under the mayor's direction, did a government accountability and transparency report. It's called the Gator Report, and use this data to show where fees come from on two scenarios. One's a 4-story apartment, and the other one is coming up as I think a 6-story multi-use. We added in the land use fees, though, so it's comprehensive for a project to building permit, basically. Okay, so land use fees that include trades permits as well, trade permit fees. So it's got building permit fees, it's got some sidewalk driveway fees in here, and then all the SDCs. So currently, on a new 4-story apartment at $4.2 million value, this is what a development would be charged. The blue here is all system development charges based on these 4 bureaus. Okay, so PBOT is maybe less than a third, maybe a quarter of the SDC. The rest of the pie are the other bureaus' charges. Let me move this up just a little bit. BDS is the black here, and then PBOT is, I think, this blue right here, PBOT's fees. So what we wanted to show is the effect of this new SDC rate on a 4-story apartment. And you can see the effect would be a change of about $10,000. The other example that we have is...
A question. For parks on this and the prior graph looked like you assumed a 2,200 square foot house or larger. Parks fees scales based on house size.
Right.
What assumptions are you making on this?
I believe they used outside the central city. Rich, do you know what square footage? We can get that information. Yeah.
And this is proposed parks, or other bureaus' proposed fees, or their current?
These are the current fees that are in place as of August 2016.
Oh, it says it right here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. The only thing that it's showing on the right side is our change in system development charges. The other example is a 6-story apartment. Again, similar current fees in effect, August 2016 currently in effect, and then what the change in rate with this new methodology would be on that type of development. In this example, it goes down. The reason it goes down is the change in methodology from the PM peak hour trip generation that we're using, okay? So that's what the science shows in getting more better data by using the person trip data. Okay? So some rates will go down. Let me say this. Some total comprehensive assessments to developments will increase. Some will go down. Some will remain relatively flat. A new single-family residential unit will increase from the current rates for transportation SDCs from about $2,800 to $4,000. Sorry, I should have that at the top of my head. $5,400, $5,100. The maximum we could have charged for a new single-family residential is $10,000, $10,000 plus dollars. Back in 2007, when council capped the rates, the single-family residential rate could have been set at $7,000 for transportation, but they capped it at about $1,000, and it's been going up by inflation to get to the current rate about $2,800. So new single-family under this proposal would go up. So Gary, you asked the question of why we set it at a 50%, not the full rate. PBOT and our commissioner are concerned about affordability, but we're also concerned about moving the dial on the things that matter to the transportation system as well as the citizens of Portland. You know, time in travel, safety, and predictability are concerns for the city as well as equity. So we got feedback from our stakeholders groups through outreach, and some people said we wouldn't start at the conversation above 50% list, and some people said we wouldn't start it below 50%. So we thought 50% was a good recommendation to our director, and that is what she is supporting. So as Art mentioned, we will use this money to leverage other funds. We will not collect all of the money to fund all of the projects on the list. That is similar to our current program. But that's the rate that we are moving forward with and
So
recommending.
If I could follow up on that, what's the policy rationale why different bureaus would have different recovery percentages? Why is parks here and transportation here and sewer somewhere else?
I'm not sure it's a policy rationale.
Yeah, I think it's individual. I mean, I think as this commission and maybe DRAC has pointed out, bureaus take their rates and system development charges to council for approval and through their commissioners independently. We definitely listen to other bureaus. And again, we've historically, because I think we went first in 1997, were directed by our commissioner at the time to stay in the middle of the pack.
So I just want to highlight for my colleagues, I think we're going to have a longer discussion at the end of this about the cumulative impacts. I think part of that should be, why isn't there a policy rationale for how this funding source is allocated among bureaus? I think that's a huge missing piece, and what I'm hearing is it's really the political environment whenever you take your fee to council is what determines the answer, and that's not good policy.
Well, just a comment that parks, we had a conversation earlier, parks, that does not represent 100% of what a park needs. That's a percentage. I don't remember exactly what it was, but everybody's in the same boat. In fact, the very similar methodology was used to determine parks SDCs, and frankly, what it really boiled down to was, where do we fit among all the other cities in the region? It was a very similar conversation. Well, we want to be somewhere in the middle, somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and Parks has done an incremental increase over the last, I'm not sure how many years, to get to, I believe, 100% financing of their needs. I just want to end with this one last slide. Not all trips are not alike, and we looked at centers and corridors and the central city to see if there is indeed a mode share split that could support a reduction in SDCs. And the basis of that is the physical space that each one of those users take up in the right-of-way. And the rationale behind this, and this was a recommendation for our consultant, is a pedestrian and a bicyclist use less space than a single occupancy vehicle. And so what they found is if you build to a certain type of land use, so it's not auto-centric, and to a certain density that, and the land use development meets the city's goals for good growth, that you actually have a reduction in trips that you make. So we are looking at a person trip adjustment in the central city of 33%, and then centers and corridors of 8%. Okay. Again, that's based on what we've seen from the science that our consultant has provided. Okay. So just to end here, again, the council hearing is July 26th. The new system development charge would go into effect January 2018. So that was some of the feedback we heard from folks, and we took that into consideration. So the public comment period is open, and we decided to go for 90 days rather than 60 because we were ready to go. So I guess that's it, and we'll take questions. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, well, we definitely appreciate you coming and walking us through all this. That was good, great explanation. I see hands already, so Chris and then Eli.
So I have some policy questions, and then I have a number of questions about your public involvement process that I want to dig into. So I like the person trip methodology. I think that's a big step forward. I'm curious where that accommodates freight. You know, with the truck that stocks my grocery store, the van that delivered my Amazon package yesterday, where do they go into the cost equation?
So freight still is based on a person trip. So if you have a vehicle, that's a trip that that vehicle makes. So if it's a delivery truck, then conceivably it's one driver making one person trip. If it's a carpool full of people, we adjust for the typical vehicle occupancy rate and the trip length. So freight has is part of the equation for person trips. And then the types or the number of trips that each development generates is either based on the observable data that we have gathered, or Portland State or one of the other cities that we're working in partnership has gathered, or we have had to do an extrapolation from the ITE third handbook on those development rates that equate better to person trips than what we've had in the past. So either it's an observable rate or it's a calculation, but freight is in the mix as far as person trips and how we can quantify it.
Okay.
So can I just get a little clarification on that? Are you okay with that?
It seems a little goofy to me, but
Okay.
I'm sticking with it for the moment.
Yeah, that's totally confusing me, but you keep at it and I'll
Okay.
get clarification
All right.
later.
A policy question for my colleagues to think about. When we discussed the Rose Quarter project in the central city, we passed a recommendation that put funding limits on that, saying Portland should only pay a very defined share. That project is in this list for, I think, $10 million. I guess I'd ask my colleagues to think about whether we want SDCs to be one of the potential funding sources for the city's contribution to that. We can come back to that. So with regard to public involvement, I appreciate the online open house and particularly using Facebook ads as a way to pull people into that. I did see, if I read the report correctly, that the demographics of the respondents you got are still a little bit less diverse than the city is. Did you consider targeted ads at communities that would have increased the diversity, East Portland, communities of color, or were they just sort of blanket Facebook ads?
We actually, for Apano, for example, contacted them 3 times, wanting to go out and meet with them. So there was a handful of groups that typically don't come to meetings that we did direct calls to and did not get a lot of results. We are still willing to go out and talk to them. So if there's any way that you can help us get on their agenda, we would love to go
Okay.
out there and get their feedback.
Well, that's my next question, is sort of, you didn't do the traditional come down to the Portland building, we'll have a bunch of boards and people you can talk to kind of open house, right?
Yeah, we did that here, or at the 1900 building a little bit as well. Yeah, we stuck up some boards, but yeah, it supplemented it, yes.
Okay. So a lot of this was the groups you went out to. And you've talked about the neighborhood associations and the developers. I guess there were some categories that I was surprised to see were missing. You talked to your own modal advisory committees. I don't think you talked to the modal advocacy organization, so I'm thinking about Oregon Walks and the Street Trust, who were deeply embedded in the TSP sorting criteria that I think would have great interest in this.
Okay.
Low income or communities of color, and I'm thinking the Community Alliance of Tenants that has figured out that parking policy drives their affordability. I think they could make the leap to these investments are going to affect their affordability. Environmental justice groups like Opal that has raised significant transit investment equity questions. Didn't see those on the list.
We will get out to those folks. Yep.
Okay, I think that's
Thank
really
you,
important.
Chris. Yeah,
Okay, I'll stop there.
that was excellent.
Go ahead, Eli.
Well, I've got questions on a very different topic here. In terms of how the fees are distributed, and I tracked pretty closely the Parks SEC update recently, where they also went one per person, and they came up with a very different approach where they scaled the SDC by the home size of the home as the best proxy for a number of people living in it. And I'm curious why you didn't do the same here.
So when we started this study in 2015, or I guess I should say we started thinking about it, we had that on the agenda. I was very interested in getting it sized by the square foot of development. What we have is a update that really is relying on the best data that we can possibly get out of person trips and trip generation models. And the data for person trips is not supported by the square foot of a single family house. What we found is it is more supported by the local context. And that's part of the reason we did the centers and corridors and central city discounts. Now, that said, from an affordability standpoint, there could be a policy decision for single-family homes to reduce that rate to make it more affordable. I know the Cully Neighborhood Association chair is very interested in using maybe the SDC rates from transportation to be an incentive to build smaller footprint houses. I think that's a policy level decision that is the next step if that's a recommendation outside of the rate study. But the rate study is basically built on science with a recommended rate.
My take from Parks is that it's not, right, currently the policy, since there is a demonstrated nexus between number of people, you have to have some proxy for number of people because people are hard to count, right? So you have to go with some average. And the best proxy is size of home. Multifamily, as you guys probably know, multifamily, single family, those words do not exist in the zoning code. And so that's another bit of feedback. But under the current proposal here, the charge for 800 square foot home is the same as the charge for a 3,000 square foot penthouse suite apartment. That's not neutral. That's incentivizing the 3,000 square foot penthouse suite apartment over the small home. So I guess I want to put out there that neutral would be to use the best proxy we have, which is size of home. And I'm not suggesting like many increments. And I understand when Parks went through this process, they had to go through and see what actual data do they have, because you have to base it on data. And they did exactly that. And the categories they came up with are not the same ones I would perhaps use. They use 700 square feet as the threshold. And I shared those copies of both sides showing what they did. But they had that same question about data, and they did it. And I guess my hope is that you could too.
I think you have, yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
so, yes.
I would just
But that's not showing up this proposal, though. I guess what I'm hearing.
At least the briefings that I was involved in, PSU helped do analysis around
Right.
this, and they, together with Farron Pierce, the modelers, found that that threshold of size of house didn't change chip generation as much as you would expect, because a small house and a large house often have the same number of people.
Right.
And so from a transportation use perspective, it actually is based on the use of the transportation.
Are you talking people trip or people?
People trips.
People trips.
Okay, because I remember when Parks did this, that they figured out that, yes, if you go from 2,500 square foot house to 5,000 square foot house, the number of people doesn't increase much at all. Understood. But the number of people does increase at lower echelons, which is how they reflected it. And so are you showing that some people travel more and some travel? I understand with the 75% thing, that's a incentive.
So,
This may be outside of this
Maybe it makes
conversation,
sense
but.
to maybe it makes sense
Yeah,
to send
I
you the
think-
technical analysis.
and
Okay.
we'll send everybody the technical analysis, because I know this is a big deal. I will point out that in our recommended rates, we started with an ADU rate of half the single family, and we changed that instead of ADU to say anything less than 1,000 square foot. So we have that recommendation because there is some science to support that very small footprint, but not the tiers that the Parks Bureau went through. But yes, I'd be willing to send that.
I'll close with one more thought, is the single family versus multifamily. I've had projects, it takes discretion to apply that rule, because it is possible to build multifamily development in single dwelling zones. It's possible to do single dwelling development in multifamily zones. In Portland, it's, I've done projects that others have too. We have duplexes, townhomes in a multi-dwelling zone or a single dwelling zone. So there's plenty of situations where it becomes very discretionary how fees are applied. So I hope that whatever labeling comes up with, I would rather, of course, not deal with those names at all and just go by home size, as Parks has done. But if you're going to have it, then staffs need some more direction on how to apply the fees.
Okay, I appreciate that feedback, Eli. Thank you. Well, we'll try to balance out the multifamily and single family. Jeff?
Thank you. I'll pick up with something Eli was just talking about. So is the plan, let me back up a step. First of all, I appreciate the Transportation Bureau's approach to this. I know there's a lot of wrinkles and ambiguity about the methodology because you're trying something new, and so I'm sure we could all find things that don't quite click, and I have a couple of those, but I think you've been reasonable and proportionate in what you're asking for. I think you have been traditionally, and so when we get into a discussion about do we recommend to City Council that they view all the bureaus in a sort of holistic manner, I think you guys will come out fine. I think Transportation Bureau has always been a leader in not pushing the envelope and recognizing the affordability connection. So thank you. Which doesn't mean, I still think you need to be evaluated with everybody. So let me go back to Eli's point. Are you still going to allow an individual developer to make an adjustment application? Is that going to continue on? So in other words, if Eli wants to come in and say, wait a second, I'm building in such a way, the context, whatever the argument would be to show that the.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, we're still going to have,
Not in single family. Well, I don't, actually, you tell us, where can you avail yourself of that opportunity? What kinds of uses?
so we will still allow an alternative rate study. We're
Okay.
believing that we're not going to have as many as we currently do. We went through the different land use categories and tried to balance out the ones that could cover a broader use than what we currently have, because we've had some struggles with, the type of development that we see in Portland don't fit in a certain category, and we agree with the development that, it doesn't really fit, so they do an alternative rate study, which are very expensive. So we've gone through this exercise of balancing the list, but there still are some development types that will not fit. They will need to do an alternative rate study if they want to. Otherwise, we'll stick them in the best category. You can't do an alternative rate study to request a modification of the base methodology. Okay, so you can only do an alternative rate study if you find that you have supportable data to show that the trips that your development type are generating are vastly different than what the rate study shows. So I think for a single family, it would be hard pressed to have an alternative rate study showing that these trips are different. If there is science to show that single family is vastly different than what our consultant and the experts show, this is the time to get that information out. Yeah, but certainly for a blended mixed-use development that has a movie theater, we would wedge it into the certain categories based on square foot or seats. And if the development believes that, no, we have it all wrong, that there is a lot of internal trip capture or pass-by trips, that would be a good opportunity for an alternative rate study. Okay.
So single family is the only one that's getting a relatively large increase out of this. You said it's going from 2,800 to 5,100.
On
Are there
the,
any-
that's the one that it's a one-to-one, one single family gets that. The rest are generally based on square footage. I know that multifamily is also based on units. But yes, some rates will have the effect of going up for the development. Some might go down a little bit. Some might stay the same.
It may be helpful in your chart where you're showing the proposed rate to show what the current rate would be, just so the scale of change.
Okay, we could do that.
At some point, if you probably have it at some point.
It
may
we
be,
do.
maybe somewhere I didn't see it, but.
Since we're fundamentally changing the methodology, it's
Right.
difficult to compare what we currently have to what we're proposing as far as the rates, because the background data changes. But we'll try to do that. I think that would be a good comparison. We've really relied on the case studies to try to demonstrate the cumulative changes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Two more quick questions. I hope they're quick. Can you briefly describe when you did your TSDC list, almost, I don't remember the percentage, 80, 90% of the dollars you said were TSDC eligible, which means, I understand, that means they're capacity enhancing rather than maintaining the system?
Mhm.
Just generally, how'd you make that judgment?
The regional projects,
Your entire project list, you had $609 million of TSP
Yes, this one.
projects, and then you said $494 million of that is TSDC eligible, meaning which means almost all of that is capacity enhancing. It seems like a small number that's only maintaining the system.
It is, we don't include all of the maintenance activities in the TSP. So some of the repaving projects, those kind of things. So it's mostly would be bridge projects. So seismic rebuilding of bridges that are a big project, but don't change the capacity of the system.
How about a bike lane on a local street?
If it is a large enough project, it would be included here. So mostly what we're showing here is that this is there's a certain number of projects that aren't on there, but there would be neighborhood greenway projects on this list for sure. So you all should have gotten a memo from
Right.
in the last couple weeks that listed all the different projects and some summary of some of the different.
Well, that's what I was
changes.
looking at. So almost all of these you're calling in capacity enhancing rather than, I don't know, what's the alternative capacity enhancing?
Maintenance.
Maintenance.
Yeah. So we can't fund maintenance projects, but your bike lane example is a good one. So capacity is performance enhancing as well. So if there's a street, say, without a bike lane, and one of the projects is to put in a protected bike lane, and say the pavement that's adjacent to it needs some upgrading, in order for the bike lane to function, that pavement has to be redone for that entire lane. So that entire lane is essentially eligible for SDC funding because it's ancillary to the primary intent of getting that bike lane put in. So that's fundamentally what we've been able to do with this new methodology. Using the 2007 methodology, we were locked into looking project by cross-section. Some projects were 10% eligible, some projects were 60% eligible, and we were really struggling trying to find the match. That's a big match amount, trying to find 90% of multi-million-dollar projects. So yes, this methodology allows us to capture the primary increase in functionality for capacity and performance enhancing with some ancillary things that contribute to that increase in performance. But we can't fund maintenance. Yeah.
The last one.
Just real quick, in the interest of time, we were supposed to go to 3 o'clock. So I guess in some ways I want to get,
One more question.
okay, but in general, are people willing to stay a little bit longer? And I'm going to guess at this point 3:30.
I've got to leave in about 5 minutes.
Okay. But everybody else is kind of good to go. And I think just as a reminder, and this might help with some of the questions, they're asking for a letter of recommendation from us to go to City Council. I can speak for Andre since he's not here. He has expressed the desire to have you come back and talk to us some more and perhaps take public comment on it. So, and that's why I wanted to lay that out there for those of you who have questions. If there's consensus that that's something the commission wants to do, then you have another bite at the apple to get your questions out.
And I would say just to clarify, in terms of what I think is the most valuable feedback for you to be giving us is, since, at least on the project side, since you helped us form that project list, we really are looking for your opinion about whether the proposed list that Zeph sent on to you matches well what your expectations were when we did that TSP process. So that is really your opinion and not a need for you to accumulate another set of opinions through public input. That you actually are the experts we need to hear this answer from.
So, for example, the SDC discussion is, you're doing a courtesy briefing for us, but it's not technically in our
Yeah, this isn't a legislative
purview.
process.
Yeah.
You're not actually the
Right.
one, you're not necessarily, the way when we submitted the TSP to you, once we submit it to you, it's actually your TSP. So if we want to make an amendment, we're making a friendly amendment to your TSP. In this case, you're not in that level of arbitration that you're trying to do. City Council is in that function. So you're helping advise City Council on how best to navigate this process.
And so, if we were to really pinpoint it, you're looking specifically, maybe you could say from us, ideally probably a recommendation on everything, but if nothing else, really specifically pointed at the additional items on the list, projects that you've been added to
within
the
the
list.
project realm, I think feedback on the items that were listed in green there in particular that are essentially current project plans that are on their way to City Council that staff felt like we wanted to capture the moment and get them on the list so we don't have to wait 10 years to be able to start working on them. There's a lot of really good projects around transit, and Zeph's memo kind of listed all the different projects underway, Vision Zero, some of those. And then there are some of those projects that are listed in yellow, actually, honestly, more than I had expected that were listed in yellow, that are minor tweaks that staff are working on. one of the exciting thing that's happening is staff are using the TSP list now as a living document. So rather than something that we look at every time we update the TSP every 5 years, they're trying to keep this list ready and live at all times. And so they're actually tracking sort of play-by-play changes in a way that we haven't tried to do before.
I was surprised at how much yellow as well.
I was too. I was like, oh.
So, I guess kind of to that, if we were to ask you to come back and talk about a public comment kind of meeting, ideally we'd be focusing on public comment for the green items on that list.
Yeah, right.
Is that correct? Am I understanding?
I would agree, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So with that, we still got a few minutes here to go ahead and ask questions. Maggie's are you trying to leave? Do you have a question?
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask a very.
Okay.
Because this isn't this is not the full TSP list that
Correct,
we
yeah.
looked at. So I'm curious why there aren't more Vision Zero gap analysis or Vision Zero projects on this list that are prioritized.
We did capture, so there's a number of them in yellow. So mostly there were projects in yellow that are listed, that actually say in the far right column, Vision Zero. So that's, the Vision Zero team met together with Zeph and the TSP team and tried to make a whole series of amendments. So they think they've done a good job of blending those two together, and the Vision Zero team is going to bring that set of recommendations to council between now and July to have that completed for them.
So there was only a handful on there. So
Right.
how many recommendations or projects that need to be funded for the Vision Zero plan?
Many of them, I think, are ones that were already felt that were captured in here. So they're not even in yellow. There are some that are in white that are essentially saying they already are capturing the Vision Zero intent. And some they felt they needed to amend the description of it to make sure that the scope change was understood. So for instance, MLK might be a good example in which we just completed a project on MLK, but they feel like there's under a new Vision Zero lens, a need for another set of work on MLK. And so that, I think, is a new project that's included on here. Right.
Would it be helpful to have a pie chart that kind of overlays?
A percentage of
Sure.
what's being covered in this recommendation
Right.
out of the total number of recommended TSP or Vision Zero projects.
Okay.
So Katie, I know you also have a question. Are you trying to leave? If not, I think I should at least give the mic back to Jeff to let him finish up his questions.
Okay, no, I'm not trying to leave.
Okay. Since I rudely cut him off.
So this is from the Portland State Critique, and I was confused about the point they're trying to make. They say costs for non-motorized trips are 6 times greater than motorized trips. So they seem to be saying transit, bike, pedestrian is a hell of a lot more expensive to provide for than a car. Isn't that counterintuitive to what? Well, it struck me as counterintuitive. I thought roads, building more road capacity is more expensive than serving people with transit and bikes.
So what the critique did is pointed out the flaws in our current system and the way that we captured growth and deficiencies unfairly, I think, represented the non-motorized costs as 6 times higher than they actually are. The way that we did the comparison for projects on what's an eligible growth component versus what's a maintenance or a serving existing growth was based on motorized, transit, pedestrian, and bicycle. And the transit, for example, was based on what is the number or the quantity of high-frequency transit lines within a certain neighborhood, and compared the project by project based on that as the level of service. And so you get different neighborhoods that were disproportionately impacted by that kind of base level of service and not having so many projects being eligible. But holistically, the approach that we took really provided the auto trip as the cheapest means of getting funding through the SDC. So it was just a flaw in the system. Yeah,
right?
the current
So
system that we're using.
Yeah. So in part it's because there were more motor vehicle trips. So if you have a list that has a lot of pedestrian bike trips in it, but there's more motor vehicle trips, they're not contributing towards it the way it's set up. So there was a built-in tension within the old list where because of the number of motor vehicle trips, they were essentially diluting the cost of the motor vehicle trip. And because there was a smaller number of folks being actually using those bicycle and pedestrian facilities, they were higher per user cost. And so by going back to people rather than by the number of cars, we're actually balancing that back out with the new methodology.
I'm going to think about that. But thank you. I think.
Katie? My head was spinning when I was trying to get my head wrapped around that.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the project list, and partly it's because, when I was reading through the report, I felt like I was dropped down in the middle of it. I kept having to remember, oh yeah, this is about those charges. You were trying to figure out a good methodology for figuring out how to select the proper level of these systems development charges. So, but the project list, of course, was super interesting to me. And so I wanted to know, is the project list in there just to set the SDD charge? How much, I was looking at it more from the point of view of, oh, wow, this is being considered, blah, blah, blah. And I was probably less, I'm about a year into being on this commission, and so I wasn't really as much part of putting together the list. So what does it mean that it's on this list? Does that mean it's going to be done in the next 5 years?
Fantastic question. This is a really good question.
Yeah.
So we get this a lot, actually, as we're talking about even the TSP as a general piece, is that, there's an assumption that once you're in the TSP, it means you're a real project that has money attached to it. So in the TSP arena, there really is, there's sort of conceptual funding and conceptual project lists that need to match up. Once you get into the SDC list, this is actually a real revenue stream, but there isn't enough for us to get to every one of these projects.
50%.
Yeah, so what we'll need to be doing is as we have done for many years, looking to outside sources and trying to attract them with some SDCs against these projects and against the benefits of the project to pursue them. So it puts them in sort of the next category up from projects that we're generally interested in to projects that have the potential to be funded, but it's only once we are able to connect them with grant funding or PDC funding or another agency funding, those kind of things, that they become fully funded projects. Yeah. So it's good news for them, but it isn't that they're fully underway at this point.
Right, so if they have money in the one column that says they're already budgeted, that means that
Those ones are ones that are going to happen.
Those are definitely going to be done.
Those are definitely in. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the other ones, my concern sometimes is East Portland will often get, and you'll have your graph and it shows the 25%, but when it actually comes to them being built, and that's changing, but oftentimes a sexier project will beat out an East Portland project.
Right.
So that's why I was wanting to.
No, I think that's a great point. One of
that.
the things that we've come to realize, and one of the benefits of the new methodology, is that the East Portland projects may not have the potential for an LID with the local property owners to be the match for that. It's just a different environment. And the benefit of being able to go to a higher amount of SDC funds is that we can actually fund more of the project ourselves. So in those kind of environments, or where there's certain grant areas where we can make it really competitive by offering more than 50% of the cost of the project, we, under this new methodology, will have more potential to do so.
Okay, well,
But
that's
so
wonderful.
it'll be a constant challenge for us to find the other matching funding. Certainly, if the state legislature can follow through on some conversations that are happening now, that will help us a lot. We'll have some additional funds that we can match up there. There's a potential that the growing Portland, or whatever the new funding stream that the mayor is talking about, could be the extra matching sources. There's a variety of sort of exciting moves really in the last couple months that give me more hope that we can move more of these projects more quickly.
The one thing I do recall for Outer East Portland is our expenditures and forecasted expenditures under the current 10-year SDC have exceeded our revenues collected there. So we are spending more on projects in Outer East Portland right now.
Excellent.
But just to clarify, the list is a filter. If your project does not appear on this list, it cannot get SDC funding.
Cannot get SDC funds. It doesn't mean it could happen under other means, but SDCs wouldn't be one of those means.
State law sets out there's two methodologies. You can either be an improvement fee, like parks and transportation, or you can be a reflective fee based on the system capacity you've already built. And that's what water and BES do. So we have to have a capital list. And you're right, that sets the total amount that we do the math based on.
Okay.
Eli?
I appreciate your offer of sharing the technical information for the way the fees were proposed to be levied. I'm wondering in terms of process, if we have a hearing, I'm not an expert in PSU's data set, but I know somebody who is. And I guess I'm wondering whether that would be an eligible comment item. I would like it to be, if we have a
We
hearing.
can't stop them from commenting on.
Okay.
And it, just FYI, it wouldn't be a true hearing. It'd be more public comment.
Public comment, yeah.
Yeah. But again, if you know somebody, again, we would love to talk to them because we want to make sure that we have really good methodology.
Okay, thank you.
Chris, looks like you were leaning in.
Well, I'm ready when we're going to get to the question of are we going to have them back and are we going to have public comment? So if we're there, I'll talk, otherwise I'll wait.
I think we're there. Well, Teresa, is it quick?
Yes, No. So in your rate comparisons, and you're showing other jurisdictions in the local area, did you do any checking outside our area for a similar sized city as Portland? Because, I wouldn't say that Tigard is the same as Portland.
So Fair and Pierce, our consultant, relied on the League of Oregon Cities to collect that data. They surveyed, I think, 159 cities, and they found that about 49 cities had a system development charge. And when we did the table, we tried to pick the more local cities. So there is a bigger data set. All within Oregon. There are, I can't remember, maybe there are 23 states that actually have enabling legislation to do a system development charge. Washington State right now, I don't think does have that ability. A lot of the case law comes out of Florida. They also were one of the first states to do system development charge. It seems like it's not as comparable to Portland. So yeah, we will get as much data as we can out of the states that have that legislation.
I promise it's really quick, since this was brought up and the people are looking at it, it's really not a very helpful comparison to include the Washington County cities. They have a very different transportation structure in Washington County. It's not an SDC, it's actually a tax.
It is tax.
And you also have brand-new greenfield communities in those cities that have a new supplemental to fund an entire new greenfield development. So they're just, I understand why it's there, but it's really not, it's not a close connection to say, oh, Beaverton, South Cooper Mountain, 16,000, therefore Portland can be something. There's a lot of variables. So.
Yeah, you're right. They have a tax rather than SDC. Yeah.
Joe.
So I apologize, I had to walk out of the room, but just to back to the list. My understanding of the list, Art, is that this list is to develop the fee, that there's projects added to the list or proposed to it, and they're considered for the purposes of calculating this fee. Before they're going to be able to be funded by sources other than SDC, so before they're real, they will be amended into the TSP, and that comes back here. So as we're thinking about the public comment option, if you wanted to do that, that whole list of projects is coming back here. So what's germane about it is there's a technical reason because of the timing of the update of the regional TSP or something, but they have to come back through here.
I guess I know there's one concern on Rose Quarter. I wasn't sure if there were other concerns. So far, we haven't heard any actually concerns about these.
About the specific projects. Okay. Yeah. So then secondly, what's I wanted to put out a frame for what sort of makes sense for the PSC's consideration when we look at the SDC charges, these and others. And really, it always goes back to the comprehensive plan, right? Is it advancing? Is it something about it designed to advance what we just adopted in terms of the policies and goals for the growth of the city between now and 2035? The TSP list is part of that. It's got to come back. There are policies in the plan that are potentially affected by this SDC, but the overall system of charges, right? And that's what we've been talking about for a long time, which is the cumulative effect of all the charges that we have, what the Gator process looked at. That's not necessarily decided with this PBOT SDC. So when we have if we have public commentary, there's a constrained sort of field of things that are really relevant to talk about. And there's a whole public hearing process at City Council. And as we have seen from just going through the comp plan, multiple hearings, it's hard to keep the comments on what it is that you really want to or have to talk about. Like, I fully expect what I think Christine said, or Art said at some point, that at City Council, there's going to be testimony to just relitigate the TSP. And what we'll have to do is remind City Council that that's not the decision they're doing. So just keep that in mind as the frame for getting additional testimony or getting public comment. Of what I've heard discussed today, the one that resonates the most with policy in the comp plan and actually issues that we spent a lot of time talking about right now is the impact on the cost of housing, and not so much the cumulative impact of all these SDCs, but the size question that Eli was getting to. That's an interesting point that if we have a way of getting it back into the discourse of PBOT, we may not need a whole nother meeting or a whole nother meeting with public commentary, because we've identified an issue that we want to continue to explore. If there's expertise we can bring in to help with that, maybe that's a different way of doing this. And just for context, in the residential infill project, we have a proposal on the table to limit the size of a single family structure, a single dwelling in a single dwelling zone, infill, 2,500 square feet. And so the principle is this: if you get the size of the house within bounds and you've eliminated your fear of McMansions, we care less, or the proposition is we might care less about how many units are in it. And so in the residential infill project, we're talking about allowing more liberal use of duplexes in single family zones. So at 2,500 square feet divided by 2 is more than 1,000. You're allowed to do a duplex and an ADU. So, the math of that gets a little more complicated, but a policy that was designed to work with that kind of outcome would be really useful. We're on 2 different timeframes, though, because this is going to be set in the next few months, and we're not getting to City Council sign off on the specifics of the code till the end of the year. However, at the policy level, they've signed off on roughly this. So that's the kind of thing that strikes me as really in sync with what we're trying to do in the comprehensive plan right now.
Can I ask
And there's a
another
way
quick
to work on it
context
separate.
question? So in terms of the affordable housing package and where we ended up with that and potential city offsets, are these within the universe of SDCs that are potentially waived as part of trying to make the developers' numbers work?
I don't know.
So affordable housing, it has their SDCs for all 4 bureaus waived as long as you meet the criteria for owner-occupied or rental or development type. So that will remain unchanged.
Okay, so if I'm building more than 20 units in an apartment building and I now have to do the 20% affordable units, and the city's going to give me some package to make this work out financially. We've got all these numbers here about you're projecting how much money is going to come out of this. I'm just wondering how that folds into all this.
So I know one of the strategies is to waive SDCs, and that was some of the things that the Gator process looked at for the market rate units. But right now, the code allows the affordable units to be exempt from paying all 4 bureaus system development charges, and that's what I believe is going to move forward. So the market rate units would still be assessed their individual SDCs.
it would reduce that. That's why that's really one of the major reasons why there's that range in there
Right.
is because of those kind of impacts.
And the shifts between, well, currently, if you're 60% MFI and below, you get the exemption if you meet all the other conditions. The analysis has been how many of those developers are going to move to the 80% MFI. And I think the impact was on parks and transportation, maybe a couple $1 million a year from moving that target. So yeah, good question.
So I'm going to agree with Joe's framing and then expand it. So one, I do want more time to consider this because I want to dive into the freight methodology and get smarter about some of the other aspects we've touched on today. There is obviously our legislative nexus as the Planning Commission where we're mandated to make recommendations on certain things related to land use, and the project list is near that nexus. But when we added sustainability, we also added a wider purview to stick our nose into more things. And for example, I think the question of whether we fund this at 50%, 60%, or 70% is a legitimate policy question that we can have an opinion on. This is one of our better funding sources for active transportation. The legislature is still way biased towards freeway projects. I'm grasping for the tools to offset that. So, I hope we will take the wider view. To the question of whether we invite public comment as part of that process, I've heard, I think Eli's heard from people in the community who think there have not been enough opportunities for public input into this, and I recognize that you're trying to use some different avenues, but there are people who still don't feel fully heard. And I guess the question I want to pose to my colleagues is, do we want to provide that opportunity as a way to address some of those people, or do we want to? Is our criteria just is that comment going to help us arrive at an opinion on whichever of the factors we want to weigh in on? So I think that's the question in my mind of whether we invite public comment on this.
I appreciate that. And I think to your first point on public comment, I am a little concerned that it'll be nothing but frustration for people understanding kind of our lens. So I do kind of throw it back, I guess, at our full commission is, do we find it's going to be helpful for us to come to a conclusion on what to recommend? And if so, then I think it's an important part of the process. I certainly appreciate our commission being that filter to help reach out to a lot more people within the community and the public. And my first gut reaction was absolutely, let's do that. Like I said, I'm just a little bit concerned about framing what the discussion is. So Eli and then Mike.
Well, I did ask the question of a friend who served on the Peabody Budget Advisory Committee, where apparently there was not public comment. Perhaps there are opportunities for it, but it wasn't happening through that process, which made me think, well, Peabody doesn't have its own review body. Maybe this is, a secondary proxy, for the public to speak up. And my inclination, so I guess my inclination is to accept public comment, recognizing that it has to be framed, so we don't make this into a land use process. And I think that's.
Can you suggest what you want the public comment to?
Well, I guess I'll say the other comment I have related to public comment, is that I know that this commission has been shy previously about writing letters without hearing public comment. I think Commissioner Bacharach's brought that up a couple times. I'm not sure we want to make a letter or a recommendation on this without having heard from the public. And this seems like if that would make the commission more comfortable, right? Well, we're being asked to write a letter right now, right, of support. And I feel like we might be able to come up with something without public comment, but I think if it would help the commission feel more comfortable weighing in on it, having had a chance to hear others, then I would support that.
Can I just mention on the public comment, we are still accepting public comment, and we are still doing outreach meetings to communities, and that will be incorporated in the final council hearing. So it's not like we have the rate study up and we're done accepting public comment. I just want to point that out because I know it complicates matters where we have pointed people to come to the website for the public comment and then to the council hearing. So.
Yeah.
However we proceed, I just hope we don't wind up pitting parks against transportation, that the function of this is to address these issues, not to say, should parks get fewer SDCs and PDOT get more? That's what, I hope we don't go there.
Maybe it would be the opposite way.
That's not what we should be doing.
Go ahead, Jeff.
I guess Eli, I'm just trying to understand. We start off by hearing all we're being asked to recommend on or comment on is the project list. And so I'm satisfied based on what Joe said that we've already, the project list is really a placeholder in a sense, as I understand it. It's already, Chris, stop me when I'm wrong, it's already part of the TSP. We will be reviewing more TSP. And so we're not really substantively agreeing to fund new projects. These are already projects. We're just kind of putting them in a different category for purposes of making the SDC methodology work. If I'm getting that right, then I don't have, I don't.
And to spend funds from the SDC pool on these projects.
Right, well, if they're on the list, right.
No,
that's-
I think an important clarification is Rose Quarter, which Chris is concerned about, is already a TSP project. It's not one of the new green projects. That's an existing project that already went through the TSP process. One that Chris doesn't support, but it's nonetheless already.
And is it, and you only, and you're saying $10 million of that project?
We felt, so what we did with the large regional projects, just, and again, this is eligibility, not actual expenditure, is that we set them all at 10 million. Feeling that they are all big conversations, we don't want to tip our hat one way or the other how it's all going to play out. So Southwest Corridor, 10 million, Rose Quarter, 10 million. Each of these big moves, we just put 10 million against them. For some cases, like the Southwest Corridor, the Ross Island Bridgehead is a really important project related to that. We put 10 million against that too. But at each of those big regional moves, we just placed 10 million against them and said, this is not the moment where we're going to solve exactly how we transact with those big regional projects.
But having put it on the list, you could spend more than 10 million.
Not without going back to council.
Right, we'd
So
have
that's
to.
a cap?
Yes.
That is a cap.
Yeah, so the TSD, the eligibility amount is the top,
Okay.
not the commitment. So we have many projects on the current SDC list that are eligible for 5 million, and we found a way with just 1 million of SDCs to catalyze the rest of the project. So this is our down payment fund towards those bigger things. In some cases, we could spend that whole 10 million. That's true, but we're always going to be trying to minimize our funds and leverage other people's money.
Keep in mind, one other benefit of having a project SDC eligible is if a private developer builds it, they're incentivized to build it because then they'll get a credit. So if you want them to extend a sidewalk or
So-
That's exactly true.
build more, there's
Or
a
they say direct
value,
benefit.
there's a second value.
Yep.
So I was just trying to understand what we would have the public hearing on. Is it the whole methodology? Is it the question of changing
The
policies?
things I'm most interested in are probably not the project list. It's the crossover between like the 75% of the projects that will be eligible for showing trip reduction and the methodology for charging projects, that methodology. So it's the collection side of it, more so than the project list. And as Chris's comment was,
So
what do we put our nose in?
In the interest of time, Joe wanted to jump in here. Everybody wants to jump in. I guess I am inclined to say we'd love for you to come back. It sounds like we have more to discuss with you. We really are interested in the material you presented today. To not encourage public comment, because I think, again, if we were to try to take the lens on what the list is looking at, I'm not hearing a lot of discussion from this group about concern about what's on the list and how the list was filtered or determined. And that's kind of the key piece of what we'd be looking for the public to comment on. If you're listening to our discussion, we're rightfully so, and I'd love to have another meeting where, and I'm not sure it's where you come back or not, with how we talk about the methodology of SDCs, how you guys go about it, whether we think that's makes sense with our other policy priorities, including parks, including BES, including water, because I do think understanding everything as a whole and trying to balance everything fairly as a whole is a part of our role as a planning commission. That being said, Joe, go ahead and jump in.
Well, I just want to offer this. If PBOT was to come back, really, it sounds like our concerns have a number of pretty specific questions behind them. And it would be great, and we will work with the commission to compile those questions and get those answered so that the next round, if there's a face-to-face discussion of this, we can dig deep and maybe resolve those. Rather, my concern with the public comment is that there's a process that's going to get there, and that's the right place for people to show up and be heard. Would be a stop along the way with hard to explain sort of set of bounds on what it is that we're listening to. So we might confuse people. And we can get much more deep into what you're really concerned about by doing it this way. Is that okay? Does that work for, so it seems to work for PBOT, we could do it that way.
Yeah, and definitely if you want to dive into the details of the methodology, we can either talk ahead of time or Fair and Peers and Deb Gallardi can come and she can get into the science of what we have for the trip rates. And I think that if you're interested. Again, I'm not sure if that's where you guys want to go. It seems like you have multiple things that you're interested in. I know DRAC is also interested in diving into the details. I mean, it may be something too that a council work session to talk about SDCs overall would be helpful. That's part of what the Gator attempted to do. So
as a process, could I recommend that, first of all, that if there's additional specific items people want us to look into or consider or ask of PBOT, that we get them to Julie. And then let's perhaps digest at our next officers meeting about kind of what does that look like, and is that having you guys come back, or is this something we can answer through memorandum to us, and then we'll go into a discussion on kind of following up with where we would take a recommendation.
Okay.
Does that make some sense?
Mhm.
Okay. Any other comments, concerns, additional discussion? Chris, you look like you're just, okay. Okay. With that, I believe we are adjourned. Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.